Every story begins with once upon a time, but the most beautiful tales are often found in the quiet spaces between sleep and dream. Tonight, we wander beyond the familiar paths walked by the brothers Grimm into forgotten corners where different stories wait patiently, stories that understand the gentle art of peaceful endings. These are the tales that lived in grandmother's voice and father's bedtime whispers, stories that dance between memory and wonder. Like the Grimm brothers before us, we gather these forgotten gems not to frighten, but to comfort, not to startle, but to soothe your journey into dreams. Before we begin, if these gentle tales bring you peace, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Share with us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. There's something magical about knowing we're all connected across the world by these timeless stories that cradle our sleep. So settle into your most comfortable place, let your breathing slow, and drift with us into worlds where love transforms everything it touches, where being different makes you extraordinary, and where every ending whispers the promise of sweet dreams. Our first tale begins in a nursery where toys and hearts become beautifully, impossibly real. The Steadfast Tin Soldier. In a bright toy shop that smelled of pine shavings and paint, 25 tin soldiers stood at attention in their neat cardboard box. They had been crafted by the finest toy maker in the city, each one identical to his brothers, except for one. The 25th soldier had been cast last when the tin was running low, so he had only one leg. But he stood just as straight and looked just as brave as any of his brothers, balanced perfectly on his single leg with his rifle at his shoulder. All the soldiers wore the same splendid uniform, a blue jacket with bright red trim, white trousers with a sharp crease, and a tall black hat with a gleaming badge. Their faces were painted with determined expressions, ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. The day after they arrived in the shop, a little boy chose their box as his birthday present. With excited hands, he carefully lifted each soldier from the box and arranged them on his bedroom table. "Look at this one," he said when he came to the one-legged soldier. "He's different from all the others, but he looks the bravest of all." The boy set up elaborate battle scenes, with the soldiers defending a cardboard castle against an army of wooden blocks. But the one-legged soldier was positioned near the edge of the table, where he had a perfect view of something that took his breath away. There, in a delicate paper castle cut from the whitest paper, stood the most beautiful ballerina the soldier had ever seen. She was poised in an eternal arabesque, one leg extended behind her so gracefully that it seemed to float in the air. Her dress was made of the finest gauze, with a tiny blue ribbon at her waist, and her dark hair was crowned with a silver tinsel tiara that caught the lamplight like stars. What captured the tin soldier's heart most of all was that, like him, she appeared to have only one leg. Her extended leg was hidden behind her, invisible from where he stood, making them kindred spirits in his tin heart. "She's perfect," he thought, never taking his painted eyes off her graceful form. "She's as steady and balanced as any soldier and twice as beautiful. If I could marry anyone in the world, it would be her." Day after day, the tin soldier maintained his post at the edge of the table, always watching the paper ballerina with devoted attention. He memorized every detail of her face, every fold of her gauze dress, every angle of her perfect pose. Even when the boy moved the other soldiers around for different games, the one-legged soldier remained in his spot, faithful in his admiration. The ballerina, for her part, never seemed to notice him. Her painted eyes gazed serenely ahead, focused on some distant point that only she could see. But the tin soldier didn't mind. Love, he had discovered, didn't require anything in return. It was enough just to be in her presence, to spend his days watching over her like the loyal soldier he was. But not everyone in the toy room was happy about the tin soldier's devotion. In an ornate black box that sat on the bookshelf lived a mischievous Jack-in-the-Box. He was painted like a goblin, with a pointed hat and a sneering expression, and he had grown jealous of the attention the soldier paid to the ballerina. "You there, Tin Soldier," the Jack-in-the-Box would call out when the boy wasn't around. "Stop staring at the ballerina. She's too good for the likes of you. Why don't you look somewhere else?" But the steadfast Tin Soldier never responded to the goblin's taunts. He stood at attention, silent and dignified, his gaze never wavering from his beloved ballerina. One evening, after the boy had gone to bed and the house was quiet, something strange began to happen. As the clock struck midnight, all the toys came to life. The wooden blocks rearranged themselves into towers, the toy horses pranced across the floor, and the dolls began to dance. The Jack-in-the-Box sprang out of his container with a wild laugh. "Now's my chance," he cackled, bouncing across the table toward the Tin Soldier. "You've been warned, soldier boy. Tonight you'll learn what happens to those who don't listen." With a powerful spring, the goblin knocked into the Tin Soldier, sending him teetering at the edge of the table. For a moment, the brave soldier balanced on his single leg, trying to maintain his position, but gravity won and he tumbled head over heels through the air. Down, down he fell, past the edge of the table, past the boy's chair, landing with a sharp clink and a crack between the floorboards. There he stuck, head first and upside down, his rifle pointing toward the ceiling, and his one leg waving helplessly in the air. From his uncomfortable position, he could just barely see the table above. The ballerina continued her eternal dance, unaware of his plight, while the Jack-in-the-Box laughed nastily and bounced back to his corner. The next morning, the little boy searched everywhere for his missing soldier. He looked under the bed, behind the dresser, in all the toy boxes, but the Tin Soldier was wedged too tightly in the narrow crack to be seen. There he remained all day, looking up at the distant ceiling, thinking about his beautiful ballerina and wondering if he would ever see her again. That afternoon it began to rain. First a gentle patter, then a steady drumming, and finally a tremendous downpour that sent rivers of water rushing along the gutters. When the rain stopped, two street boys came splashing through the puddles. "Look here," cried one, spotting something glinting in the crack between the boards. "It's a Tin Soldier, and he's got only one leg. Let's send him on a voyage." The boys dug the soldier out of his trap and brushed him off. Then they folded a piece of newspaper into a boat, placed the Tin Soldier inside, and set him sailing down the rushing gutter stream. Away he went on his paper boat, bobbing and spinning as the current carried him along. The water splashed over the sides, soaking his uniform and washing the paint from his face, but still he stood at attention. He had been made to be a soldier, and a soldier he would remain no matter what adventures awaited him. The paper boat sailed under bridges made of boards, past gardens where children watched and cheered, around corners where the current ran swift and deep. The Tin Soldier held tight to his rifle and thought of his ballerina. Would he ever see her again? Would she wonder what had become of him? As the boat rounded a sharp bend, it was caught in a whirlpool and began to spin faster and faster. Water poured in from all sides, and the newspaper began to dissolve. Just as the boat was about to sink entirely, a large fish with gleaming scales and hungry eyes rose from the depths and swallowed the Tin Soldier in one enormous gulp. Inside the fish, it was darker than the darkest night. The Tin Soldier could feel himself sliding down the creature's throat, but still he clutched his rifle and maintained his military bearing. "Well," he thought to himself, "this is certainly an unusual posting, but a good soldier adapts to any circumstances." For what felt like hours, he sat in the fish's stomach, thinking about his ballerina and remembering every detail of her graceful form. He wondered if she missed him, if she had noticed his empty spot at the edge of the table. The thought of her gave him courage even in his strange and uncomfortable predicament. Then suddenly, everything began to move violently. The fish thrashed and struggled, and light began to filter in from somewhere above. Voices echoed strangely around him, and he felt himself being lifted and moved. The fish, it turned out, had been caught by a fisherman and sold at the market. By an extraordinary coincidence, it had been purchased by the cook in the very house where the Tin Soldier had begun his adventure. When she cut open the fish to prepare it for dinner, imagine her surprise at finding a Tin Soldier inside. "My goodness!" she exclaimed. "This is the strangest thing I've ever seen. A tin soldier. And look, he's only got one leg. Wasn't there a toy soldier missing from the master's boys' collection?" She carried the tin soldier upstairs and placed him on the very same table where his adventure had begun. There was his cardboard castle, there were his brother soldiers still standing in formation, and there, oh joy, there was his beloved ballerina, still dancing her eternal dance, still beautiful beyond words. The tin soldier's heart would have leaped if tin hearts could leap. He was home. He was back where he belonged, back where he could see his darling ballerina every day. His uniform was tattered from his journey, his paint was worn away, but his love burned as bright as ever. But the Jack in the Box was not pleased to see him return. "Back again, are you?" the goblin sneered. "Well, we'll see about that." That evening, as the family sat by the fireplace after dinner, a sudden gust of wind from the chimney blew through the room. The draft caught the tin soldier, who was still positioned near the edge of the table, and lifted him into the air. Whether it was the wind or the goblin's mischief, no one could say, but the tin soldier found himself flying through the air toward the blazing fireplace. He landed right on the hearth, where the flames danced merrily, and the heat was intense. From the fire, he could see his ballerina one last time. She stood on her table, still graceful, still beautiful, still dancing her perfect dance. The heat was melting his tin body, but his eyes remained fixed on her beloved form. Then another gust of wind caught the paper ballerina. She fluttered through the air like a butterfly, spinning and twirling as she had never done before. The wind carried her directly to the fireplace, where she landed beside the tin soldier in a burst of flame. For just a moment, they were together. The steadfast tin soldier and his beloved ballerina, united at last in the dancing flames. The paper ballerina blazed up bright and beautiful, and then was gone, leaving only a small piece of tinsel from her tiara. The tin soldier melted in the heat, but as he did, something wonderful happened. Instead of melting into a shapeless puddle, his tin body formed itself into a perfect heart, a heart that had loved truly and faithfully, a heart that had remained constant through every adventure and trial. The next morning, when the maid cleaned out the fireplace, she found the little tin heart among the ashes. Beside it lay a small piece of silver tinsel, all that remained of the paper ballerina. She held them both in her palm, marveling at how they seemed to belong together. "How strange," she murmured. "It's almost as if they were meant to be together." And perhaps they were, for love that burns as steadfast and true as theirs has a way of lasting forever, transformed but never destroyed, constant as the stars, and enduring as the heart itself. In the toy room above, the remaining tin soldiers stood at attention in their box, and sometimes, when the light was just right, it seemed as though they were saluting, not just their missing brother, but the love that had made him truly brave, the devotion that had made him truly steadfast, and the constancy that had made him at last truly whole. The Velveteen Rabbit. In a cozy nursery, painted the softest shade of blue, there lived many toys. There were tin soldiers standing at attention in neat rows, a wooden horse on wheels that had once been magnificent, and a collection of books whose pages had grown soft from countless bedtime readings. But tucked away in the corner, between a forgotten music box and a basket of blocks, sat a little rabbit made of brown velvet. The Velveteen Rabbit was not like the other toys. He had no batteries, no wheels, no moving parts. His fur was simple brown velvet, his ears lined with pink satin that had begun to fade. When he was new, his coat had been thick and lustrous, his whiskers sharp and proud, but now, after many months in the nursery, he appeared rather plain compared to the mechanical marvels that surrounded him. The rabbit often watched the other toys with a mixture of wonder and longing. There was a magnificent clockwork dragon that could spread its wings and breathe tiny puffs of glittery smoke. The toy soldiers could march in formation when wound up, their brass buttons gleaming. Even the old rocking horse, though his paint was chipped, had a dignity about him that spoke of grand adventures and midnight rides through imaginary kingdoms. "What does it mean to be real?" the Velveteen Rabbit asked one quiet afternoon when the sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, creating dancing patterns on the nursery floor. He was speaking to the skin horse, the oldest and wisest toy in the room. The skin horse had lived in the nursery longer than anyone could remember. His brown coat had been loved away in patches, revealing the canvas beneath, and his tail was nothing more than a few strands of yarn. The skin horse looked at him with eyes that held years of gentle wisdom. "Real isn't how you are made," he said in his soft, thoughtful voice. "It's a thing that happens to you when someone loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the Velveteen Rabbit, thinking of how some toys got broken when they were loved too much. "Sometimes," admitted the skin horse, remembering his own transformation. "But when you are real, you don't mind being hurt. Real isn't about having all your parts perfect or having the newest mechanisms. Real is about being loved so completely that it changes you from the inside out." "Does it happen all at once, like winding up a clockwork toy?" the rabbit wondered, his black bead eyes bright with curiosity. The skin horse smiled, a gentle expression that transformed his worn face. "It doesn't happen all at once. You become real gradually. It takes time. That's why it doesn't often happen to toys who break easily or have sharp edges or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, your eyes drop out, you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly except to people who don't understand." The Velveteen Rabbit thought about this conversation for many days. He watched as the boy who lived in the house played with different toys. Sometimes it was the clockwork dragon, sometimes the toy soldiers, but none of them seemed to have that special something the skin horse had described, that deep, transformative love that made you real. Then one evening, something wonderful happened. The boy's usual bedtime companion, a teddy bear, couldn't be found anywhere. Nana searched high and low, under the bed, behind the dresser, in the toy chest, but the bear was nowhere to be seen. The boy was growing sleepy and beginning to fuss, and bedtime was approaching rapidly. "Here's a bunny," said Nana, reaching into the toy corner and pulling out the Velveteen Rabbit. "He'll keep you company tonight." The boy looked at the rabbit with interest. He had noticed him before, of course, but had never really paid him much attention. The rabbit was soft and cuddly, with a pleasant weight that felt comforting in small arms. That night, for the first time, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first it felt strange and wonderful, the warmth of the child, the gentle rhythm of his breathing, the way small fingers unconsciously held onto his ears. It was everything the rabbit had dreamed of and more. When morning came, he almost expected to feel different, to somehow be real. But he looked the same as always, felt the same as always. But something had begun. Night after night, the boy reached for the Velveteen Rabbit at bedtime. Sometimes he would whisper secrets into the rabbit's soft ears, fears about the dark, excitement about tomorrow's adventures, questions about the world that only a gentle listener could receive. The rabbit became the keeper of dreams and the guardian of sleep. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The boy took his rabbit everywhere, to the garden where they would sit under the apple tree and watch clouds drift by, to the breakfast table where the rabbit would sit patiently while the boy ate his porridge, to the car and long drives to visit grandmother in the countryside. Slowly, gradually, the rabbit began to change. His brown velvet fur grew soft and thin from constant hugging. His pink satin ears faded to a gentle cream color from being rubbed between sleepy fingers. One of his bead eyes came loose, giving him a slightly lopsided but endearing expression. His whiskers, once so straight and proud, became bent and worn. But with each sign of wear, the rabbit felt something growing inside him. It was warm and golden like sunshine, like the feeling of being exactly where you belong. He began to understand what the skin horse had meant. The shabbiness didn't make him feel less beautiful, it made him feel more himself. The other toys began to treat him differently too. The clockwork dragon, once so proud of his mechanical perfection, would nod respectfully to the rabbit. The toy soldiers would salute him as he passed. Even the music box with her tiny dancing ballerina would play her sweetest melody when the rabbit was near. "You're becoming real," the skin horse told him one day, and there was pride and joy in his voice. "I can see it happening. The boy doesn't just play with you, he loves you, and that love is transforming you into something wonderful." One spring morning, the boy became quite ill with a fever. For days, the Velveteen Rabbit never left his side. He lay on the pillow next to the child's flushed cheek, offering what comfort he could. When the boy tossed and turned in his sleep, troubled by fever dreams, the rabbit was there, a constant presence of love and safety. "My bunny," the boy would whisper when he woke, "don't leave me, bunny." And the rabbit, of course, never did. When the fever finally broke and the boy began to recover, the doctor declared that, for safety, all of the toys that had been in the sick room must be taken away and burned to prevent the spread of illness. The rabbit's heart sank. After all this time, after coming so close to being real, was this how his story would end? But as he lay in the garden, waiting for his fate, something magical happened. A gentle breeze stirred the flowers around him, and there in the evening light appeared the most beautiful being he had ever seen. She had gossamer wings that caught the last rays of sunlight, and her smile was full of kindness and understanding. "I am the nursery magic fairy," she said in a voice like silver bells. "I take care of all the toys that children have loved. When they are old and worn out and the children don't need them anymore, I turn them into real. The boy loved you so much that you were already becoming real to him, but tonight I'm going to make you real to everyone." With a touch of her hand and a whisper of ancient magic, the Velveteen Rabbit felt himself changing. His shabby fur became the softest, most beautiful coat. His bent whiskers straightened and gleamed. His loose joints became strong and supple. But most importantly, he felt his heart begin to beat with real life. "Run and play," the fairy said gently. "You are real now, and real bunnies must hop and run and live in the world." The rabbit, now a real rabbit, felt his powerful hind legs for the first time. With a joyful bound, he leapt into the garden, free and alive, and completely himself. In the distance, he could see other rabbits who had once been toys playing in the meadow beyond the garden wall. But before he ran to join them, he paused and looked back at the house where the boy slept peacefully in his bed. The rabbit's heart was full of gratitude for the love that had made him real. He understood now that the boy would always carry a part of that love with him, and he would always carry a part of the boy. Love, he realized, was the most powerful magic of all. It could transform anything: a worn velvet rabbit, a lonely child's heart, a simple toy into something real and precious and eternal. With one last look at the nursery window glowing warm and golden in the evening light, the real rabbit hopped into his new life, knowing that somewhere a little boy was dreaming peaceful dreams, and that love had made them both exactly who they were meant to be. Thumbelina. In a cottage garden where roses climbed the walls and sweet peas perfumed the air, there lived a woman who wanted nothing more in the world than to have a child of her own. She had waited and hoped for many years, tending her flowers and dreaming of tiny hands that might help her plant seeds and small feet that might run laughing through the garden paths. One day, unable to bear the longing any longer, she sought out a wise old woman who lived at the edge of the village. This woman was known for her knowledge of herbs and magic, and it was said she could help with problems that seemed impossible to solve. "I want so much to have a little child," the woman told her, tears glistening in her eyes. "Could you perhaps help me? Could you tell me where I might find one?" The wise woman looked at her with kind, understanding eyes. "Indeed, I can help you," she said, reaching into a small leather pouch. "Take this barley seed, but mind you, it's not the kind that grows in farmers' fields or that feeds the birds. Plant it in a flower pot with the richest soil you can find. Water it with morning dew, and wait. You may be surprised by what grows." The woman hurried home with the precious seed clutched carefully in her hand. She found her finest clay pot, filled it with the blackest, richest earth from her compost pile, and planted the seed with all the care she might have given to the most delicate rose bush. Each morning she watered it with dew collected from rose petals, and each evening she whispered to it the lullabies she had always longed to sing to a child. After exactly 7 days, a green shoot pushed through the soil. It grew with magical speed, rising higher each hour until it formed a perfect bud that looked remarkably like a tulip. The woman watched it with growing excitement, sensing that something wonderful was about to happen. On the morning of the 8th day, the bud began to open. The petals unfurled slowly, revealing their deep red color edged with gold, and as the final petal opened wide, the woman gasped in wonder and delight. There, sitting in the center of the flower on a cushion of golden stamens, was the tiniest, most perfect little girl she had ever seen. She was no bigger than a thumb. Indeed, she could have used a thimble for a bathtub, but she was perfectly formed in every detail. Her hair was like spun gold, her eyes were the blue of summer skies, and her voice, when she spoke, was like the tinkling of silver bells. "Hello," said the tiny girl, looking up at the woman with bright, curious eyes. "Are you my mother?" "Oh, yes, my darling," whispered the woman, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, I am your mother, and you are my precious daughter. I shall call you Thumbelina, for you are no bigger than my thumb, but perfect in every way." The woman made Thumbelina a bed from a polished walnut shell, with violet petals for mattresses and a rose petal for a blanket. During the day, Thumbelina would sail across bowls of water in a tulip petal boat, using a horsehair for an oar. She would sing in her sweet bell-like voice while her mother worked in the garden, and in the evenings they would sit together by the window while her mother told her stories of the wide world beyond their cottage. Thumbelina was perfectly happy in her tiny paradise. She had everything she could want, a mother who loved her dearly, a beautiful garden to explore, and flowers that were like palaces to her small size. She made friends with the butterflies who would let her ride on their backs, and the garden mice, who thought she was the most charming creature they had ever met. But one night, as Thumbelina slept peacefully in her walnut shell bed, disaster struck. A large, ugly toad hopped through the open window, attracted by the sound of Thumbelina's sweet singing earlier that evening. "What a lovely little creature," croaked the toad, peering at sleeping Thumbelina. "She would make a perfect wife for my son. He's about her age and just as handsome as his mother." Before Thumbelina could wake up, the toad gently lifted the entire walnut shell bed and hopped away with it through the window. She carried Thumbelina to the muddy bank of a slow-moving stream, where she lived with her son in the roots of an old willow tree. When Thumbelina woke up the next morning, she found herself in a place she had never seen before. The air smelled of mud and stagnant water instead of roses and sweet peas. Worse still, sitting before her was the ugliest creature she had ever seen. A large, warty toad with bulging eyes and a wide, croaking mouth. "Good morning, my dear," said the old toad in what she probably thought was a pleasant voice. "I'm going to be your new mother-in-law. This is my son. Isn't he handsome? You two are going to be very happy together." The son was, if possible, even uglier than his mother, and all he could say was, "Ribbit, ribbit, ribbit." When he saw Thumbelina, his eyes bulged even more, and he croaked excitedly. "Oh no!" cried Thumbelina, finally understanding what was happening. "Please, I don't want to marry anyone. I want to go home to my mother." But the toads paid no attention to her protests. They placed her walnut shell on a large lily pad in the middle of the stream so she couldn't run away, then hopped off to prepare for the wedding. Thumbelina sat on her lily pad prison and wept bitter tears. The water was too deep and wide for her to swim across, and the lily pad was too slippery for her to push to shore. She seemed to be completely trapped, doomed to marry the ugly toad and live forever in the muddy swamp. But the fish swimming below had heard everything, and they felt sorry for the tiny, beautiful girl. Such a sweet little creature shouldn't have to marry that horrible toad, they whispered to each other. Working together, they nibbled through the green stem that anchored the lily pad to the bottom of the stream. Suddenly, Thumbelina felt her leafy boat begin to move. The current caught the lily pad and carried it downstream, away from the toads and their wedding preparations. As she floated along, Thumbelina's heart began to lift. She was free, she was having an adventure, and surely, if she was brave and clever, she would find her way back home. As her lily pad boat drifted down the stream, a beautiful white butterfly noticed the tiny girl. Charmed by her sweet singing and her brave spirit, the butterfly fluttered down to land beside her. "Where are you going, little one?" asked the butterfly in a voice like rustling leaves. "I'm trying to get home to my mother," Thumbelina explained, "but I'm not sure which way to go. I'll help you travel faster," offered the butterfly kindly. Thumbelina took off her silk sash and tied one end around the butterfly's waist and the other to the lily pad. The butterfly's strong wings pulled the leaf boat along much faster than the current alone could carry it. They were making good progress when suddenly a large cockchafer beetle came buzzing through the air. He spotted Thumbelina and was immediately struck by how different and interesting she looked. "What an unusual creature," he buzzed, swooping down and grasping Thumbelina around her tiny waist. Before she could protest, he had carried her up into an oak tree, leaving the butterfly still tied to the lily pad, tugging frantically in the stream below. "I've never seen anything like you," said the beetle, setting Thumbelina on a leaf and studying her curiously. "You're very pretty, even though you only have 2 legs and no antennae at all." The beetle called all his relatives to come and see his interesting find, but when the other beetles arrived, they were not impressed. "Look at her," buzzed one. "She has such a narrow waist. How ugly." "And where are her antennae?" asked another. "How can she be considered beautiful without proper antennae?" "She looks almost like a human being," said a third beetle with disgust. "How perfectly hideous." Soon all the beetles were agreeing that Thumbelina was quite ugly indeed. The cockchafer, who had thought her pretty at first, began to think he must have been mistaken. If all his relatives thought she was ugly, then ugly she must be. "You know what?" he said to Thumbelina. "I don't think you're pretty after all. You can go wherever you like. I don't want you anymore." He flew down with her to a daisy at the bottom of the tree and left her there. Poor Thumbelina sat on the flower and cried, not because she wanted to stay with the beetles, but because everyone seemed to think she was ugly. She didn't understand that she was actually very beautiful. She was just different from them, and they couldn't see past that difference to appreciate her unique loveliness. Summer was ending, and Thumbelina found herself alone in the great world. She made herself a bed under a large burdock leaf to keep off the rain, and she wove a blanket from grass. She ate pollen from flowers and drank dew from rose petals, living as well as she could in her tiny size. But when winter came, her troubles grew much worse. The flowers died, the leaves fell from the trees, and her burdock leaf shriveled up. Snow began to fall, and each flake was like a whole shovelful falling on someone of Thumbelina's size. She wrapped herself in a dry leaf, but it cracked and didn't keep out the cold at all. Just when she thought she might freeze, she discovered the entrance to a field mouse's burrow. The field mouse was warm and comfortable, with rooms full of grain and a cozy kitchen. "You poor little thing," said the field mouse, when she saw Thumbelina shivering at her door. "Come in and warm yourself. You can stay with me for the winter if you'll keep my rooms tidy and tell me stories." Thumbelina gratefully accepted this offer. The field mouse was kind enough in her way, and it was certainly better than freezing in the snow. She swept and cleaned and told the most wonderful stories about the garden where she had lived with her mother. One day, the field mouse announced that they were going to have a visitor. "My neighbor is coming to call," she said excitedly. "He's very wealthy and very learned. He wears a beautiful black velvet coat, and he has the most amazing underground palace. If you could marry him, you'd be very well provided for indeed." The visitor turned out to be a mole, sleek and black in his velvet fur coat. He was indeed wealthy, with tunnels and rooms stretching for miles underground, filled with everything one could want. But he had never seen sunlight and thought flowers were useless nonsense. "Sing for our guest," urged the field mouse, and Thumbelina sang in her sweet voice about summer gardens and butterflies dancing in the sunshine. The mole was enchanted by her singing, though he disapproved of the subject matter. "Very pretty," he said, "though all that nonsense about flowers and sunshine is quite foolish. Nothing good comes from the surface world." As winter progressed, the mole visited often, always asking Thumbelina to sing. He was falling in love with her voice and her gentle nature, though he intended to cure her of her fondness for sunlight and growing things. One day, as they walked through one of his tunnels, they discovered a swallow lying motionless on the ground. The bird had been caught by the early winter and had fallen down into the tunnel, apparently dead. "Stupid creature," said the mole, poking it with his foot. "What a waste of a life, spending time flying around and singing instead of doing something useful like digging tunnels." The field mouse agreed. "Birds are frivolous creatures. Thank goodness we're too sensible for such foolishness." But Thumbelina felt sorry for the beautiful bird. That night she crept back to the tunnel with a blanket woven from hay. She covered the swallow gently, and as she did, she felt a faint heartbeat. "You're not dead," she whispered joyfully. "You're just frozen. Let me help you." Every night throughout the winter, Thumbelina secretly visited the swallow, bringing him water and tiny pieces of grain. Gradually, he grew stronger, though he had to stay hidden in the tunnel until spring. "You saved my life," the swallow told her gratefully. "When spring comes, I'll fly away to warm countries where the sun always shines and flowers bloom year-round. Come with me, dear little friend. You can sit on my back and we'll fly far away from this dark underground world." But Thumbelina shook her head sadly. "I can't leave the field mouse. She's been kind to me, and it wouldn't be right." Spring came, and the swallow grew strong enough to leave. Before he flew away, he thanked Thumbelina once more and promised to remember her kindness forever. As summer arrived, the field mouse made an announcement. "The mole has asked you to marry him," she told Thumbelina excitedly. "The wedding will be in the fall. You must start preparing your wedding clothes immediately." Thumbelina's heart sank. The mole was kind in his way, but she would have to live forever underground, never seeing the sun or flowers again. She spent the summer sadly sewing her wedding dress, going above ground whenever she could, to feel the sunshine on her face and say goodbye to the world of light and growing things. On the day before the wedding, Thumbelina went above ground one last time. As she stood in the sunshine, feeling more hopeless than she had ever felt before, she heard a familiar sound, the sweet song of a swallow. "Thumbelina!" called the bird, swooping down to land beside her. It was her friend, the swallow she had saved during the winter. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Why do you look so sad?" Through her tears, Thumbelina explained about the wedding and her fate to live forever underground. "This will never do," declared the swallow. "Come away with me now before it's too late. I know a place where you'll be truly happy, a land where creatures like you live in flowers and sunshine." This time Thumbelina didn't hesitate. She climbed onto the swallow's back, and together they soared up into the blue sky. They flew over forests and mountains, over seas and valleys, until they reached a land where the sun shone warm and bright year-round. In a garden more beautiful than any Thumbelina had ever imagined, the swallow set her down on a white flower. To her amazement, in the center of the flower sat a tiny man no bigger than herself. He had gossamer wings like a butterfly and wore a golden crown on his head. "Who are you?" asked Thumbelina in wonder. "I am the prince of the flower people," he said, smiling at her with delight. "I've never seen anyone so beautiful. Would you do me the honor of becoming my queen?" Unlike all the other creatures who had wanted to marry her, this prince was exactly her size, and he lived in a world of sunshine and flowers. More importantly, he asked for her choice, rather than simply deciding for her. "Yes," said Thumbelina, her heart full of joy. "Yes, I will." The prince gave her gossamer wings like his own, and a new name, Maya, which meant beloved. All the flower people came to celebrate their wedding, bringing gifts of the most beautiful petals and the sweetest flower nectar. And so Thumbelina, now Queen Maya, found her true home at last in a kingdom where being small was perfect, where flowers were palaces, and where she ruled with wisdom and kindness beside a prince who loved her exactly as she was. The swallow visited every year, carrying news between Thumbelina and her human mother, who never stopped tending her garden and thinking fondly of her tiny daughter, who had grown from a magic seed into a queen. For Thumbelina had learned that sometimes the journey to finding where you belong takes you far from where you started. But when you finally arrive, you know you're truly home. The Ugly Duckling, in a quiet corner of the countryside, where willow trees bent low to kiss the surface of a clear pond, a mother duck had built her nest among the tall reeds. It was late in the season, and she had been sitting on her eggs longer than usual, waiting patiently for the last one to hatch. "Peep, peep," came the tiny voices as, one by one, 6 beautiful ducklings broke free from their shells. They were the most adorable creatures you could imagine. Fluffy yellow balls of soft down with bright orange beaks and webbed feet perfect for swimming. Mother Duck counted them proudly, her heart swelling with joy. But there was still one egg left, larger than the others, with a shell the color of old parchment. Mother Duck settled back down to wait, though she was beginning to worry. Had she been sitting long enough? Was there something wrong with this last little one? Finally, with a crack and a struggle that seemed to take forever, the final egg split open. Out tumbled a baby bird unlike any of the others. Where his brothers and sisters were golden yellow, he was mottled gray-brown. Where they were small and compact, he was larger and more awkward. His neck seemed too long, his feet too big, his beak a different shape entirely. "Oh my," said Mother Duck, though she tried to keep the surprise out of her voice. "Well, you're certainly different." The other ducklings gathered around their new sibling, and their reactions were immediate and unkind. "Look at him," they quacked. "He's nothing like us. He's so big and ugly. Are you sure he's really our brother?" The little gray bird looked down at his reflection in a puddle and felt his heart sink. Even to his own eyes, he looked nothing like the others. His feathers were the wrong color, his shape all wrong. He tried to quack like his siblings, but even his voice sounded different, deeper, more resonant, somehow sadder. Now," said Mother Duck, though privately she too was puzzled by this strange child. "He's part of our family, and we'll love him just the same." But even as she said the words, she couldn't hide the uncertainty in her voice. When it came time for swimming lessons, the differences became even more apparent. The yellow ducklings took to the water naturally, paddling in perfect formation behind their mother. But the gray bird, despite his larger size, seemed to struggle more. His long neck got in the way, his big feet felt clumsy, and try as he might, he couldn't seem to keep up with the graceful movements of his family. "Swim faster," called his siblings. "Stop being so awkward." But the harder he tried, the more ungainly he became, splashing and floundering while they glided serenely past. On land, things were no better. When they went to visit other duck families around the pond, the comments were immediate and cruel. "What an ugly creature," the other ducks would whisper, not bothering to lower their voices. "Surely that can't be one of yours?" they would ask Mother Duck, who would ruffle her feathers, defensively, but couldn't quite meet their eyes. The gray bird tried everything he could think of to fit in. He practiced swimming in secret, working on his strokes until his muscles ached. He tried to make his voice higher, to quack like his siblings. He even tried rolling in yellow mud, hoping to change his color, but nothing worked. If anything, his efforts only seemed to make him look more awkward and out of place. The worst part wasn't even the teasing from the other young birds. It was the look in his mother's eyes, a mixture of love and disappointment, care and confusion. He could see that she was trying her best to accept him, but he could also see how much easier it would be for everyone if he were just like the others. As the weeks passed, the comments grew harsher. "He's bringing shame to the whole pond," said the old gander who considered himself the authority on proper waterfowl behavior, something that ugly shouldn't be allowed around the young ones. It might be contagious. The gray bird siblings began to distance themselves from him. Where once they had at least tolerated his presence, now they actively avoided him. When they played games, they wouldn't include him. When they went exploring, they would sneak away without telling him. Even at mealtime, they would crowd him out, leaving him to find his own food around the edges of the group. One morning, the gray bird woke up to find his family gathered together, speaking in low, serious voices. He approached slowly, hoping to join the conversation, but the talk died away as soon as they saw him coming. "We think," said Mother Duck, not quite able to look him in the eye, "that perhaps it would be better if you went to find your own way in the world. You're getting quite big now, and maybe there are others like you somewhere else. Others who would understand you better." The words hit him like a physical blow. Even his own family couldn't bear to have him around anymore. Fighting back tears, he nodded silently. Without a word, he turned and walked away from the only home he had ever known. The world beyond the pond was vast and frightening for a young bird alone. He wandered from place to place, always hoping to find somewhere he might belong. But everywhere he went, the reaction was the same. The chickens in the farmyard squawked in alarm and chased him away. The geese by the river hissed and told him he was too ugly to stay. Even the wild birds in the forest scattered when they saw him approaching, as if his very presence were somehow wrong. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The gray bird grew larger and more awkward looking than ever. His feathers remained the same mottled brown-gray. His neck seemed to stretch longer. His feet grew bigger and more ungainly. Sometimes he caught glimpses of himself in still water and wondered why nature had made him so different, so wrong. As autumn arrived and the leaves began to turn golden, the gray bird found himself by a large lake he had never seen before. He was weary from traveling, lonely beyond measure, and beginning to wonder if there was any place in the world where he might belong. Then, as he stood at the water's edge, feeling more alone than ever, he heard a sound that made his heart skip, a trumpeting call that seemed to come from the sky itself. Looking up, he saw a sight that took his breath away. Flying overhead in perfect formation was a flock of the most magnificent birds he had ever seen. They were pure white, with long, graceful necks and powerful wings that caught the afternoon sunlight like silk. Their calls were like music, deep, resonant, beautiful. As they circled the lake, preparing to land, the gray bird was struck by a feeling he had never experienced before. These birds looked familiar somehow, not in their perfection, but in their shape, in the way they moved, in something indefinable that stirred recognition deep in his heart. The magnificent birds landed on the lake with barely a ripple, gliding across the water with an elegance that made the gray bird's heart ache with longing. He had never seen anything so beautiful, so graceful, so completely right. "I know I'm ugly," he whispered to himself, watching them from his hiding place among the reeds. "I know I don't belong anywhere, but just once, just this once, I want to be near something beautiful." Gathering all his courage, he swam slowly toward the group of white birds. With each stroke, he expected them to notice him and fly away in disgust. But something strange happened. Instead of fleeing, they turned toward him with interest. Instead of harsh words or cruel laughter, they made welcoming sounds. "Hello, young one," called the largest of the white birds, swimming gracefully toward him. "You're looking well. Your feathers are coming in beautifully." The gray bird was so shocked he almost forgot to stay afloat. "My feathers?" he stammered. "But I'm ugly. I'm different. I don't belong anywhere." The beautiful bird looked puzzled. "Ugly? Different? My dear young swan, have you never seen your own reflection clearly?" "Swan?" The word felt strange on his tongue. "But I'm a duck, an ugly duck that nobody wants." The older bird's expression grew gentle and understanding. "Come with me," he said kindly, swimming toward a part of the lake where the water was perfectly still and clear. "Look." Trembling with fear and hope, the swan looked down into the water, and for the first time in his life, he saw himself clearly. The reflection that looked back at him wasn't that of an ugly duckling at all. It was a beautiful young swan with a graceful curved neck, pristine white feathers, and bright, intelligent eyes. "But how," he whispered, barely able to believe what he was seeing. "You were never a duck at all," the older swan explained gently. "You're one of us, a swan. Sometimes our eggs get mixed up with duck eggs, and our cygnets are raised in the wrong families. You've grown up thinking you were something you're not, judging yourself by standards that were never meant for you." The young swan stared at his reflection, seeing beauty where he had always seen ugliness, seeing grace where he had seen awkwardness, seeing rightness where he had seen wrongness. All those months of feeling different, of not fitting in, of believing there was something fundamentally wrong with him. And all along, he had simply been growing into who he was meant to be. "Welcome home," said the older swan, and the words were like music to his ears. As the young swan swam with his true family for the first time, he felt a joy so complete it seemed to lift him right out of the water. The other swans told him stories of their migrations, of the beautiful places they had seen, of the family he had always belonged to but never known existed. "Will you come with us when we fly south for the winter?" asked an elegant female swan, her voice warm with acceptance. "Yes," he said, and for the first time in his life, the word felt completely right. "Yes, I will." That evening, as the sun set over the lake, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the young swan looked back toward the distant pond where he had been raised. He felt no anger toward the duck family that had never understood him, no bitterness toward those who had called him ugly. They had simply seen him through the lens of what they expected, not what he actually was. He understood now that beauty isn't about fitting in with those around you. It's about growing into who you were always meant to be. Sometimes what makes us different is exactly what makes us beautiful. We just need to find the right place and the right people to see it. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the young swan stretched his powerful wings, preparing for his first flight with his real family. He was no longer the ugly duckling who didn't belong anywhere. He was a swan, beautiful and graceful, and exactly where he was meant to be. And tomorrow, when they took flight together, he would finally understand what it meant to soar. The little match girl. The last day of the year was growing cold and dark, and snowflakes danced through the air like tiny white feathers against the deep blue twilight. In the narrow streets of the old city, windows glowed warm and golden, and the sweet smell of roasting chestnuts and baking bread drifted from cozy homes where families were gathering to celebrate the coming of the new year. But in one of the narrowest alleys, where the wind whistled sharp and cold between the tall buildings, a little girl sat huddled against a doorway. She was very small, perhaps no more than 6 or 7 years old, with golden hair that had once been carefully braided but now hung in tangles around her thin face. Her dress was patched and worn, far too thin for such a bitter night, and her feet were bare except for a pair of old slippers that were much too large for her. Earlier that morning, she had been wearing her mother's shoes when she ran across the street to avoid a carriage. The shoes had fallen right off her feet. One was lost entirely, and the other had been scooped up by a boy who laughed as he ran away. shouting that he would use it as a cradle for his doll when he had children someday. In her small, cold hands, the little girl clutched a bundle of wooden matches. She was supposed to sell them to earn money for food, but all day long, people had hurried past without stopping. They were busy with their own preparations for the New Year celebration, buying special foods, picking up last-minute gifts, rushing home to warm fires and family gatherings. Matches, she had called out in her small voice. Beautiful matches for sale. But her voice was too quiet, too timid, and the wind seemed to snatch her words away before anyone could hear them. Now, as the evening grew darker and colder, she had sold nothing. Her father would be angry when she returned home with no money and all the matches still unsold. She had seen his anger before, and the memory of it made her shiver even more than the cold wind that seemed to cut right through her thin dress. Maybe, she thought, maybe if I light just one match, I can warm my fingers enough to call out louder, then someone might stop and buy them. With trembling fingers, she took out one of the precious matches and struck it against the rough brick wall. The tiny flame bloomed bright and warm, and for just a moment her numb fingers felt the blessed relief of heat. But as she stared into the little flame, something wonderful happened. The cold brick wall seemed to fade away, and instead, she saw a beautiful iron stove, black and polished, with brass fittings that gleamed in the warm light. A cheerful fire burned inside it, and the heat seemed to reach right out to embrace her. She stretched her feet toward the wonderful warmth, wiggling her toes in delight. But just as she was beginning to feel truly warm for the first time all day, the match burned down to her fingers and went out. The vision disappeared, and she was back in the cold alley, sitting against the hard brick wall with nothing but the tiny burnt stick in her hand and the memory of warmth. Her fingers were so cold now they could barely hold another match, but the memory of that beautiful stove gave her hope. Perhaps it hadn't been her imagination. Perhaps the matches were magic, able to show her wonderful things. Carefully, she struck a second match. This time, as the flame danced bright and golden, the brick wall became transparent like glass, and she could see right through it into the most beautiful dining room she had ever imagined. A long table was set with the finest white cloth gleaming silver, and crystal glasses that caught the light like captured rainbows. In the center of the table sat the most magnificent roasted goose she had ever seen, golden brown and stuffed with apples and prunes. Steam rose from it in delicious wisps, and as she watched in wonder, the goose seemed to hop right off its platter and waddle across the table toward her, the fork and knife still stuck in its back. The little girl reached out toward this wonderful feast, her mouth watering at the thought of such delicious food. She had not eaten anything since a crust of bread that morning, and the sight of such abundance made her heart race with hope and longing. But before she could touch the magical meal, the second match flickered and died. The dining room vanished, leaving her once again in the cold alley with her empty stomach and her bundle of unsold matches. The wind was growing stronger now, whipping the snow into tiny spirals and making her shiver so hard her teeth chattered. But the matches had shown her such beautiful things that she couldn't resist lighting another. Perhaps this time the vision would last longer. Perhaps this time she might find a way to step inside the warmth and stay there. The third match blazed to life, and this time she found herself looking at the most beautiful Christmas tree she had ever seen. It was enormous, taller even than the one she had glimpsed through the window of the grand house on the corner. Thousands of candles flickered on its branches like tiny stars, and it was decorated with the most wonderful ornaments: glass balls that reflected the candlelight, gingerbread cookies shaped like angels, golden nuts, and candy canes striped red and white. But most wonderful of all, beneath the tree were presents wrapped in beautiful paper and tied with silk ribbons. There were dolls with porcelain faces and real hair, books with gilt edges and colorful pictures, toy horses with flowing manes, and music boxes that played the sweetest melodies. The little girl gazed at this magical scene with eyes full of wonder. She had never owned a single toy, never had a Christmas tree, never received a present wrapped in pretty paper. But here, in the light of the tiny match, all these wonderful things seemed almost within reach. She tried to step closer to the tree, to touch just one of those beautiful ornaments, but as she moved, the match burned down and the vision faded away. Once again, she was alone in the cold alley, but now the darkness seemed even darker, and the cold even more bitter after the warm glow of the Christmas tree. "One more," she whispered to herself. "Just one more, and then I'll go home." As the fourth match flared to life, the little girl gasped with joy and wonder. There, bending down toward her with arms outstretched, was her grandmother, but not the tired, worn grandmother from her memories. This was grandmother, as she had been in the stories she used to tell, beautiful and radiant, dressed in flowing white robes that seemed to shimmer with their own light. "Grandmother!" the little girl cried out, her heart filling with happiness for the first time in so very long. Her grandmother had been the only person who had ever been truly kind to her, who had held her when she cried and told her stories when she was afraid. But grandmother had died the previous winter, leaving the little girl more alone than ever. "Oh, grandmother, please don't disappear when the match goes out like all the other things did. Please take me with you. I know you'll vanish when the match burns out, just like the warm stove, and the roasted goose, and the beautiful Christmas tree." But her grandmother smiled and shook her head. "Not this time, little one. This time you can come with me." The little girl quickly struck all the remaining matches in her bundle, one after another, because she wanted to keep grandmother there forever. The matches blazed together like a glorious bonfire, brighter than daylight, and in that brilliant light, grandmother reached out and gathered the little girl into her arms. Together, they rose up and up, floating gently through the falling snow, up past the narrow alley, past the tall buildings with their glowing windows, up toward the stars themselves. And as they rose, the little girl felt warmer and happier than she had ever felt before. There was no cold here, no hunger, no fear, only love and peace and the sweet comfort of being held by someone who truly cared for her. They soared together through the starlit sky to a place where it was always Christmas morning, where tables were always laden with delicious food, where warm fires always burned bright, and where no child was ever cold or hungry or alone. The next morning, New Year's Day, dawned bright and clear. The storm had passed, leaving the city covered in a blanket of pristine snow that sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. People emerged from their warm homes to begin the new year, their breath forming little clouds in the crisp air as they called out cheerful greetings to their neighbors. In the narrow alley, a passerby discovered a small figure sitting peacefully against the brick wall. The little girl looked as though she were simply sleeping, a slight smile on her lips, her face peaceful and serene. Scattered around her were the burnt remains of an entire bundle of matches. "Poor little thing," said the kind woman who found her. "She must have been trying to keep warm." But the woman was wrong. The little girl had not been trying to keep warm with those matches. She had been lighting her way to a place where she would never be cold again, never be hungry again, never be alone again. And in that place, beyond the stars, where love lights every corner and kindness fills every heart, the little match girl was finally, truly home. The Wild Swans. In a kingdom where ancient forests stretched to the horizon and crystal lakes reflected the northern lights, there lived a king who had 11 sons and one daughter. The 11 princes were as brave and noble as any boys could be, each one strong and kind and devoted to their family. But it was the princess, Elisa, who was the jewel of the kingdom. She had hair like spun gold and eyes the color of deep forest pools, but more beautiful than her appearance was her gentle heart and unwavering courage. The royal children lived happily in their father's castle, loved by their parents and cherished by all who knew them. They studied together in the great library, rode their horses through the countryside, and spent long summer evenings in the garden, telling stories and watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. But when Elisa was still quite young, tragedy struck the royal family. The queen, beloved by all, fell ill and died, leaving the king heartbroken and the children motherless. For 2 years, the king mourned alone, and the children tried to comfort each other and maintain the happiness their mother would have wanted them to have. Eventually, the king's advisors convinced him that he needed a new wife, both for his own sake and for the good of the kingdom. They introduced him to a woman of great beauty and apparent charm, though she came from a distant land where dark magic was still practiced in secret. The new queen was indeed beautiful, with raven black hair and skin like polished ivory. She spoke sweetly to the king and appeared to be everything a queen should be. But from the moment she arrived at the castle, Elisa felt a chill whenever the woman looked at her, and the 11 princes noticed that birds fell silent when she passed beneath their trees. The queen had not married the king out of love, but out of ambition and a hunger for power. Worse still, she possessed knowledge of dark magic that she had learned from her mother, a sorceress who lived in the shadow mountains of her homeland. She was consumed with jealousy of the king's children, who were loved by everyone, while she remained an outsider, respected but never truly welcomed. "These children are in my way," she muttered to herself as she watched them playing in the garden, their laughter ringing sweet and clear in the morning air. "As long as they are here, I will never truly be queen of this kingdom." For a year she bided her time, learning the ways of the castle and winning the king's complete trust. He was so grateful to have companionship again, so relieved to have someone to help him rule the kingdom, that he failed to notice the subtle changes that began to occur around the castle. When she felt secure enough in her position, the wicked queen finally revealed her true nature. One morning, when the king was away on a diplomatic mission to a neighboring kingdom, she called the 11 princes to the great hall. "My dear stepsons," she said, her voice like honey over poison, "I have something special for each of you." The princes, who had been taught to be respectful and courteous, bowed politely and waited to hear what she had to say. They had never liked their stepmother, but they had tried their best to be kind to her for their father's sake. The queen raised her hands and began to chant in a language none of them had heard before. Dark words in an ancient tongue spilled from her lips, and as she spoke, the air in the great hall grew cold and shadows gathered in the corners, despite the bright morning sunlight streaming through the windows. "By the power of darkness and the magic of my bloodline," she cried, "I command you to take the forms that match your wild hearts. Fly away from this place and never return in human form until the spell is broken." A whirlwind rose in the great hall, spinning faster and faster around the 11 princes. They felt their bodies changing, stretching, transforming. Feathers sprouted from their skin. Their arms became great white wings, and their voices became the trumpeting calls of wild swans. In moments, 11 magnificent swans stood where the princes had been. They were beautiful birds, pure white with black beaks and eyes that held all the intelligence and love they had possessed as humans. But they were no longer human, no longer able to speak or embrace their sister or live the lives they had been born to. The evil queen laughed with triumph as the 11 swans spread their great wings and flew out through the tall windows of the great hall. "Go," she called after them. "Live as wild creatures and never darken my halls again." But the queen's victory was not yet complete. There was still Elisa to deal with, and the young princess would not be so easily disposed of. The queen could not simply transform her as she had the princes. Elisa's goodness and purity created a natural protection against the darkest magic. Instead, the queen would have to be more subtle. When Elisa came looking for her brothers, she found the great hall empty, except for her stepmother, who was sitting on the throne with a satisfied smile. "Where are my brothers?" Elisa demanded, though her heart was already filled with dread. "Your brothers?" The queen's smile grew wider and more cruel. Why, they've flown away, dear stepdaughter. They've decided they prefer the wild life to staying here with us. Elisa knew immediately that something terrible had happened. Her brothers would never have left without saying goodbye, would never have abandoned her to face their stepmother alone. But before she could ask more questions, the queen continued with her plan. In fact, said the wicked woman, I think you too might be happier elsewhere. Perhaps it's time you went out into the world to seek your fortune. That very day, servants came to Elisa's chambers and told her she was being sent away to live with a peasant family in a distant part of the kingdom. Before she could protest or even pack her belongings, she was placed in a simple cart and driven away from the only home she had ever known. The peasant family was kind enough, but they lived in poverty in a small cottage on the edge of a great forest. Elisa went from being a princess in a palace to being just another mouth to feed in a crowded home. She slept on straw in the loft and worked from dawn to dusk, helping with cooking and cleaning and caring for the younger children. But even in her reduced circumstances, Elisa's beauty and goodness shone through. She told stories to the children, sang lullabies to help them sleep, and never complained about her fate. The years passed, and she grew from a child into a young woman of extraordinary beauty and strength of character. On her 18th birthday, Elisa could bear the separation from her brothers no longer. She set out into the great forest, determined to search the world until she found them. She had no plan, no map, no idea where to look, and only love for her brothers, and an unshakable belief that somehow she would find them. For days, she wandered through the forest, eating wild berries and drinking from clear streams, sleeping under the stars and following paths that led deeper and deeper into the wilderness. Sometimes she thought she glimpsed large white birds flying overhead, but they were always too far away to see clearly. One evening, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Elisha emerged from the forest onto the shore of a vast lake. The water was perfectly still, like a mirror reflecting the darkening sky, and the silence was profound and peaceful. As she stood at the water's edge, wondering where to go next, she heard a sound that made her heart leap with hope, the trumpeting call of swans. Looking up, she saw 11 magnificent white birds flying toward the lake in perfect formation. As they landed on the water with barely a ripple, something miraculous happened. The moment the sun's last ray disappeared behind the horizon, the 11 swans began to change. Feathers became skin, wings became arms, and suddenly 11 young men stood waist deep in the lake water. "Elisa!" cried the eldest, and she recognized her brother's voice with a sob of joy. "My brothers!" she called back, wading into the water to embrace them. "I've searched for you everywhere. What happened to you?" Through tears of joy and sorrow, they told her the story of their stepmother's curse. During the day, they were forced to live as wild swans, unable to speak or take human form. Only between sunset and sunrise could they return to their true shapes. "We've been searching for you too," said the eldest brother, whose name was Marcus. "We've flown over the kingdom again and again, hoping to catch sight of you, but we can never stray too far from each other, and we can never remain in human form during the day." "There must be a way to break the curse," said Elisa with determination. "There's always a way to break evil magic with good." The brothers looked at each other sadly. "We've hoped for that too," said another brother, Gabriel, "but we've found no one who knows how such a spell might be undone." As the night wore on, Elisa and her brothers talked and planned. They could not stay together constantly. The brothers had to find safe places to spend the daylight hours as swans, and Elisa needed to find shelter and food. But they agreed to meet at the lake every evening when the sun set. That night, Elisa had a vivid dream. A beautiful woman appeared to her, dressed in flowing robes that seemed to be made of starlight itself. Her face was kind and wise, and her voice was like gentle music. "Elisa," said the woman, "I am here to help you save your brothers. The curse that holds them can indeed be broken, but the task will require great sacrifice and unwavering faith. Tell me what I must do, said Elisa without hesitation. I'll do anything to free them. The woman smiled at her courage. You must gather stinging nettles, but only those that grow in churchyards or graveyards, in the soil that has been blessed by the tears of the grieving and the prayers of the faithful. With these nettles, you must spin thread and weave 11 shirts, one for each of your brothers. That doesn't sound so difficult, said Elisa, though she wondered why the woman looked so serious. Ah, but there's more, the woman continued. From the moment you begin this task until the moment it is completed, you must not speak a single word. If you utter even one sound, a word, a cry, a laugh, or a sob, you see out, your brothers will die instantly, and the curse will never be broken. Elisa's heart sank as she understood the true challenge. To gather nettles that stung terribly, to spin and weave by hand 11 entire shirts, all while maintaining complete silence no matter what happened. It would take months, perhaps years. Do you accept this challenge? Asked the woman gently. Once you begin, there can be no turning back. I accept, said Elisa firmly. My brothers are worth any sacrifice. When she woke the next morning, Elisa immediately set about her task. She found the village churchyard and began gathering the stinging nettles that grew wild among the old graves. The plants burned her hands terribly, raising welts and blisters, but she worked steadily and in complete silence. The villagers thought she had gone mad. They watched her gathering the painful plants, working with them day after day, and never speaking a word. Some pitied her, others feared her, but none understood what she was doing. Elisa set up a small shelter in the forest where she could work undisturbed. Day after day, she processed the nettles, breaking them down and spinning the fibers into thread. Her hands became raw and scarred from the constant stinging, but she persevered in absolute silence. Months passed. Elisa completed the first shirt, then the second, then the third. Each evening, she would meet her brothers at the lake and show them her progress. They wept to see her hands so damaged, but she could not comfort them with words, only with her determined smile and her steady progress on their salvation. One day, as Elisa worked in her forest clearing, a group of huntsmen came riding through. At their head was a young king from a neighboring realm, handsome and kind-hearted, who was immediately struck by Elisa's beauty and the mysterious sadness in her eyes. "Who are you?" he asked gently, dismounting from his horse. "Why do you live alone in the forest? Why won't you speak?" Elisa looked up at him with eyes full of sorrow and longing, but she could not answer. She could only shake her head and return to her work. The young king was intrigued by this silent, beautiful maiden who worked with such dedication at her mysterious task. He began to visit her regularly, bringing her food and trying to understand her situation through gestures and expressions. As the weeks passed, the king fell deeply in love with Elisa, and she, despite herself, began to care for him as well. His kindness and patience touched her heart, and she could see in his eyes that he truly loved her, even though he didn't understand her silence. One day, the king brought a priest with him. Through gestures, he asked Elisa if she would marry him. He promised to protect her, to care for her, to love her no matter what secret she carried. Elisa's heart was torn. She loved the king and wanted to be his wife, but how could she marry when she could not even speak her vows? Yet she also realized that as a queen, she might have access to resources that could help her complete her task more quickly. Finally, she nodded her agreement. The priest performed a simple ceremony in the forest clearing, with the birds as witnesses and the king's loyal huntsmen as the wedding party. Elisa became a queen without saying a single word. The king brought his new bride to his castle, where she was given beautiful rooms and every comfort. But Elisa's first request, communicated through writing, was for a tower room where she could work undisturbed. The king, though puzzled, granted her wish. In her tower, Elisa continued her work. She had now completed 7 shirts and was working on the 8th. The king's mother, however, was suspicious of this strange daughter-in-law who never spoke and spent all her time on mysterious needlework. "There's something unnatural about her," the old queen told her son. "A woman who won't speak is hiding something evil. Mark my words, she's a witch." But the king refused to listen. He could see the goodness in Elisa's eyes, could feel the love in her gentle touch. Whatever secret she carried, he trusted that it was not evil. Late one night, when Elisa had used up her supply of nettle thread, she crept out of the castle to gather more nettles from the old churchyard in the town. The king's mother, who had been watching for just such suspicious behavior, followed her. When she saw Elisa gathering plants in the graveyard under the light of the full moon, working with what appeared to be supernatural dedication, the old queen was convinced she had been right. "Witch!" she cried, running back to wake the castle. "The queen is a witch! I saw her practicing dark magic in the graveyard." A crowd gathered, and despite the king's protests, they marched to the churchyard and seized Elisa. In the struggle, several of the precious shirts were scattered, though Elisa managed to save most of them. "She must be tried for witchcraft," demanded the old queen, and the people, frightened and superstitious, agreed. The trial was set for the following day. Elisa was locked in a dungeon, with her nettle shirts as her only comfort. She had completed 10 shirts, but the 11th was only half finished, missing one sleeve. As she sat in her cell, working frantically on the final shirt, Elisa realized that she might not have enough time. The trial would begin at dawn, and if she were found guilty, she would be executed before she could complete her brother's salvation. But even as her heart broke at the thought of failing so close to success, she did not speak. Even facing death, she would not break her vow and condemn her brothers. Dawn came and Elisa was brought before the judges, still clutching her bundle of nettle shirts. The crowd jeered and called her witch, but she remained silent, her lips sealed by love and determination. Just as the judge was about to pronounce her sentence, a great trumpeting filled the air. 11 white swans came flying over the town, circling the courthouse with powerful wing beats. The crowd gasped and pointed as the magnificent birds swooped lower and lower. At the exact moment the sun touched the horizon, Elisa threw the 11 shirts over the swans. Instantly, the birds began to transform. Feathers became flesh, wings became arms, and 11 handsome princes stood in the town square. The youngest still had one swan wing instead of an arm because Elisa hadn't had time to finish his sleeve, but they were human again, alive, free, and able to speak. "Elisa is no witch," cried Marcus, the eldest brother. "She is the bravest, most loving sister who ever lived. For nearly 2 years, she has worked in silence to save us from an evil curse, sacrificing her own happiness and nearly her life for our freedom." The crowd fell silent as the brothers told their story: the evil stepmother, the curse, and Elisa's incredible sacrifice. The king wept with joy and pride as he finally understood what his beloved wife had endured. "Now I can speak," said Elisa, her voice rusty from disuse, but sweet as music to all who heard it. "Now I can tell you that I love you, my dear husband, and I can thank all of you for your patience with my silence." The old queen, ashamed of her suspicions, begged Elisa's forgiveness. The people cheered their brave queen, and the king held his wife, as if he would never let her go again. Elisa and her brothers returned to their father's kingdom, where they found that the evil stepmother had been overthrown by the people who had grown tired of her cruel rule. The king, older and wiser, welcomed his children home with tears of joy and spent his remaining years making up for the time they had lost. Elisa ruled wisely and kindly beside her husband, and her 11 brothers became known throughout the land for their courage and devotion to family, and though the youngest prince bore a swan's wing for the rest of his life, he wore it as a badge of honor, a reminder that some sacrifices leave beautiful marks that tell stories of love more powerful than any curse. The kingdom prospered under their rule, and the story of Elisa and her 11 brothers became a legend told throughout the world, a tale of how love, patience, and unwavering determination can overcome the darkest magic, and how sometimes the greatest strength comes from the gentlest heart. And in their palace garden, where white roses bloomed year round, regardless of season, visitors would sometimes see 11 magnificent white swans flying overhead in perfect formation, circling the castle as if keeping watch over the family that had refused to let evil triumph over love. The little prince's rose, on a tiny planet no bigger than a house, where 3 volcanoes provided warmth and baobab seedlings had to be weeded every morning before they could grow large enough to crack the ground, there lived a little prince who thought he understood everything about love. His planet was so small that he could watch the sunset whenever he felt sad simply by moving his chair a few steps to follow the sun around his world. He had a daily routine that kept him busy, cleaning out his volcanoes, pulling up the baobab shoots, and tending to his small domain with the pride of someone who was responsible for an entire world, even if that world could be walked around in 20 minutes. The little prince thought his life was complete until the morning when something extraordinary happened. As he was doing his usual weeding, he noticed a sprout that looked different from the baobab seedlings he knew so well. This plant was delicate and graceful, with a stem that grew straight and true toward the light. Day by day, he watched the mysterious plant grow taller and stronger. It developed buds that swelled with promise, and the little prince found himself spending more and more time caring for this special plant, watering it with precious water from his small well and protecting it from the wind with a glass screen. "What kind of plant are you?" he asked one morning, but the plant remained silent, concentrating all its energy on growing towards some unknown destiny. Finally, one dawn when the air was still and sweet, the plant's largest bud began to open. Petal by petal, it revealed itself to be the most beautiful rose the little prince had ever seen. Her petals were velvet soft and colored the deep red of sunrise, with edges that caught the light like silk. She was absolutely perfect in every detail. "Oh," breathed the little prince in wonder, "you're beautiful." The rose, now fully bloomed, looked around at the tiny planet with what appeared to be mild disappointment. "I should certainly hope so," she said in a voice like music, though there was a slight petulant tone to it. "I have been preparing for this moment for so long. I do hope I'm presentable." The little prince was enchanted. Never before had anything spoken to him on his lonely planet, and certainly nothing had ever been so beautiful. "You're the most wonderful thing I've ever seen," he told her honestly. The rose preened at this compliment, arranging her petals to catch the morning light more flatteringly. "Well, naturally, though I must say this planet is rather small, isn't it? I had hoped for something more grand for my debut." The little prince felt a small pang of hurt, but he pushed it aside. Surely she didn't mean to be unkind. "It may be small," he said gently, "but it's perfect for you. You're the most beautiful thing that's ever grown here." From that day forward, the little prince's life revolved entirely around his rose. He brought her fresh water every morning, carefully adjusted her glass screen to protect her from drafts, and listened attentively to everything she said, and she had quite a lot to say. The rose had many opinions about how things should be done. She complained when the morning sun was too bright, and when it was hidden behind clouds, she fretted that there wasn't enough light. She demanded to know why the little prince hadn't thought to provide her with better soil, and why he hadn't planted her in a more prominent location where her beauty could be better appreciated. "Really," she said, one morning as the little prince carefully watered her roots, "on other planets, roses like me are treated with much more ceremony. We have gardeners whose only job is to tend to our needs, and admirers who come from far and wide just to glimpse our beauty." "But you're the only rose on my planet," said the little prince. "That makes you even more special." "Or it makes this a very poor planet indeed," replied the rose with a sniff. "If I'm the only one of my kind here, how can anyone appreciate just how exceptional I am?" Despite her complaints and her demanding nature, The little prince adored his rose. He spent hours talking to her, telling her about his daily adventures around the planet, describing the sunsets he watched, and sharing his thoughts about the stars that glittered overhead each night. But as the days passed, the rose's complaints grew more frequent and more cutting. She criticized the way he cleaned his volcanoes, suggesting that the ash might be bad for her complexion. She questioned his method of dealing with the baobab seedlings, wondering if he was being thorough enough to prevent them from crowding her space. On other planets, she would begin, and then launch into elaborate descriptions of how much better things were done elsewhere, though she had never actually been to any other planet. The little prince began to feel confused and hurt. He loved his rose deeply, but nothing he did seemed to please her. He brought her fresh water, and she complained it was too cold. He adjusted her screen, and she said he was blocking too much light. He praised her beauty, and she accused him of not understanding the subtleties of her particular shade of red. One morning, after the rose had spent an entire hour detailing everything that was wrong with the planet and his care of her, the little prince sat quietly by himself as the sun set behind the nearest crater. He felt more alone than he ever had in all his years of solitary life. Maybe, he thought sadly, she would be happier on one of those other planets she's always talking about. Maybe I'm not good enough to care for something so beautiful and special. That night, as the stars appeared, one by one in the dark sky, the little prince made a difficult decision. Perhaps it was time for him to see what other worlds were like. Perhaps he needed to learn more about roses and how to care for them properly. Maybe, if he became wiser and more experienced, he could return and make his rose truly happy. The next morning, he told the rose about his plan. "I think I should travel to other planets," he said quietly. "Maybe I can learn how to take better care of you." For the first time since she had bloomed, the rose was speechless. She stared at him with her dark center, her petals trembling slightly in the morning breeze. You're leaving?" she asked, and her voice was smaller than he had ever heard it. "Just for a while," the little prince assured her. "I want to learn how to make you happy. You're always talking about how much better things are on other planets, so I'll go see them and learn what I can." The rose turned away from him, facing toward the sunrise. "Well," she said, trying to sound indifferent, "I suppose that's sensible, though I can't imagine what you expect to learn that would be of any use here." But the little prince noticed that her voice shook a little as she spoke. On the morning of his departure, the little prince made careful preparations for the rose's care while he was away. He cleaned out all 3 volcanoes thoroughly, pulled up every baobab seedling he could find, and left detailed instructions written on a piece of bark about when to water her and how to adjust her screen. As he was about to leave, the rose called to him softly, "Little prince?" "Yes," he turned back to her hopefully. I I want you to know that despite everything I may have said, you have taken very good care of me, better than I probably deserved." The little prince felt his heart swell with love and sadness all mixed together. "You deserve the best care in the universe," he told her gently. "And little prince?" The rose's voice was almost a whisper now. "I'm sorry I was so difficult. I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that you might not love me if I wasn't perfect. Afraid that if I didn't complain and demand attention, you might forget about me. I've never been loved before, and I didn't know how to accept it gracefully." The little prince knelt down close to her, tears glistening in his eyes. "I could never forget you," he said. "You're my rose. You always will be, no matter how far I travel or what I learn. Will you come back to me?" she asked, and now she sounded like what she truly was. Not a demanding, impossible flower, but a small, frightened creature who had never learned how to be loved. "Of course I will," promised the little prince. "And when I come back, I'll be a better gardener, and you'll be the most beloved rose in the entire universe." As he walked away from his planet, using a flock of migrating birds to carry him into space, the little prince looked back one last time. His rose stood alone on the tiny world, looking smaller and more fragile than he had ever seen her. The little prince visited many planets during his journey. He met a king who commanded the stars, a conceited man who wanted only admiration, and a businessman who spent his days counting things he claimed to own. But everywhere he went, he thought about his Rose and wondered if she was safe and happy. On Earth, he met a fox who taught him the most important lesson of his journey. One sees clearly only with the heart, the fox told him. What is essential is invisible to the eye. The time you devoted to your rose is what makes your rose so important. But there are thousands of roses here on earth, the little prince said, looking at a garden full of beautiful flowers. How is mine any different? Because she is your rose, the fox explained patiently. Because you have loved her and cared for her and worried about her, because you have formed a bond with her that makes her unique in all the universe. She may look like all these other roses, but she is the only one who matters to you, and you are the only one who matters to her. The little prince understood then that his rose's complaints and demands hadn't been signs that she didn't love him. They had been the awkward attempts of someone who had never learned how to express love properly. She had been afraid of being vulnerable, so she had hidden her true feelings behind criticism and impossible standards. She told me she was sorry, he remembered suddenly. She said she was afraid I wouldn't love her if she wasn't perfect. Love, said the fox wisely, is not about perfection. It's about acceptance, understanding, and choosing to care for someone despite their flaws, and because of them. The little prince knew then that it was time to go home. He had learned what he needed to learn, not about how to be a better gardener, but about how to be a better friend to someone he loved. When he finally returned to his tiny planet after many months of travel, he found his rose exactly where he had left her, looking a little older and more fragile, but still beautiful. She had been well cared for by the wind and rain, but she looked lonely. You came back, she said when she saw him, and her voice was full of joy and relief. I promised I would, said the little prince, kneeling beside her as he had so many times before. I missed you terribly, she admitted, her petals trembling with emotion. I had so many things I wanted to tell you, so many ways I wanted to say I was sorry for being difficult. You don't need to apologize, the little prince said gently. I understand now why you said those things. You were trying to protect yourself because love felt scary and new. It did feel scary, the rose agreed, but also wonderful. And I realized, while you were gone, that I would rather be loved imperfectly by you than perfectly by anyone else, because you're the one who chose to care for me when I was just a seed. From that day forward, their relationship was different. The rose still had opinions and preferences, but she expressed them kindly, trusting that the little prince loved her enough to want to make her happy, and the little prince listened to her concerns with patience and understanding, knowing that behind every complaint was simply a request to be loved and cared for. They spent their evenings watching the stars together, and the rose would tell the little prince about the dreams she had while he was away. Dreams of traveling to other worlds together, not because she was dissatisfied with their planet, but because she wanted to share new adventures with him. Maybe someday, the little prince would say, we'll visit all the planets I saw and you can meet all the friends I made. That sounds wonderful, the rose would reply, as long as we always come home together. And in the early mornings, when the sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold that perfectly matched her petals, the little prince would tend to his small world with joy in his heart, knowing that the most important thing in the universe wasn't the size of your planet or the perfection of your garden. It was having someone to love and someone who loved you in return. The little prince had learned that love isn't about finding someone perfect or about being perfect yourself. Love is about choosing to care for someone, protecting them, and being patient with their fears, and believing that the connection you share is worth all the effort it takes to maintain it. And as Rose had learned that being loved doesn't require being perfect or hiding your vulnerabilities behind demands and complaints. True love accepts you as you are while encouraging you to grow into the best version of yourself. Together, on their tiny planet among the stars, they discovered that the most beautiful gardens are not the ones with the most flowers, but the ones tended with the most love. And every sunset they watched together was proof that some things, like not like love, like friendship, like the commitment to care for each other, are indeed as eternal as the stars themselves. As our gentle journey through these timeless tales comes to an end, let these stories remind you that love comes in many forms. The transforming power of believing in yourself, the courage to be different, the strength to help those we care about, and the wisdom to see that true beauty lies not in perfection, but in the genuine connections we make with others. Close your eyes now and let these whispered tales carry you into dreams filled with the magic that lives forever in hearts that remain young and full of wonder. Sweet dreams, dear listener, and may you always remember that every ending is really just another beginning in disguise. The Emperor's New Clothes. In a magnificent kingdom where marble palaces gleamed white in the sunshine and golden flags fluttered from every tower, there lived an emperor who loved beautiful clothes more than anything else in the world. While other rulers spent their time studying maps or meeting with advisors, this emperor spent his days trying on different outfits, admiring himself in mirrors, and planning elaborate fashion displays. His palace contained hundreds of rooms, and almost all of them were devoted to clothing. There were rooms for his ceremonial robes, rooms for his everyday wear, rooms for his riding clothes, and rooms for garments he wore only once before deciding they were no longer fashionable enough. He had coats of every color imaginable, boots made from the finest leather, and hats decorated with the most precious gems. "Where is the emperor?" visitors would ask when they came to the palace on important business. "Oh, he's in his dressing room," the courtiers would reply, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. The emperor changed his clothes so often that people joked he had a new outfit for every hour of the day. He would appear at breakfast in one ensemble, change for his morning walk, change again for lunch, and change yet again for his afternoon meetings. By evening, he might have worn 6 different complete outfits, each more elaborate than the last. The emperor's love of fashion had made him famous throughout the world. Tailors and cloth merchants traveled from distant lands, hoping to sell him their finest wares. Fashion designers competed for the honor of creating something special enough to catch his attention. News of his latest outfit spread from kingdom to kingdom, and other nobles tried desperately to copy his style. One day, 2 strangers arrived in the capital city. They claimed to be master weavers from a far-off land, and they carried themselves with the confidence of men who possessed extraordinary skills. Word of their arrival quickly reached the palace, along with rumors of their incredible abilities. "Your Majesty," announced the emperor's chief advisor, "2 renowned weavers have come to the city. They claim they can create the most magnificent fabric ever seen, a cloth so fine and beautiful that it surpasses anything currently known to man." The emperor's eyes lit up with interest. "Bring them to me at once!" The 2 men were ushered into the throne room, where they bowed deeply before the emperor. They were well dressed and spoke eloquently, with the manner of true craftsmen who took pride in their work. "Your Imperial Majesty," said the first weaver, a tall man with an impressive beard, "we have traveled many thousands of miles to offer you an opportunity that comes only once in a lifetime. We can weave for you a fabric of such extraordinary beauty and fineness," continued the second weaver, equally distinguished in appearance, "that it will make you the most magnificently dressed ruler in the world." The emperor leaned forward in his golden throne, captivated by their words. "Tell me more about this remarkable fabric." "The cloth we weave," explained the first man, "is made from threads so delicate they are nearly invisible to the human eye. The patterns we create are so intricate and beautiful that they seem to glow with their own inner light. The colors shift and change like the aurora borealis, displaying every hue imaginable. But most remarkable of all, added the second weaver with a meaningful look, this extraordinary fabric has a very special property. It can only be seen by people who are intelligent, refined, and worthy of their positions. To anyone who is stupid, incompetent, or unfit for their job, the fabric appears completely invisible. The emperor's breath caught in his throat. Such fabric would be absolutely perfect for him. Not only would he possess the most beautiful clothing in the world, but wearing it would also prove to everyone that he was intelligent and worthy of being emperor. Anyone who couldn't see his magnificent clothes would immediately reveal themselves to be stupid or incompetent. This fabric sounds absolutely perfect, declared the emperor. You must begin work immediately. Spare no expense. Use the finest materials, take all the time you need, and you shall be rewarded handsomely for your efforts. The two weavers bowed gratefully and were given a large, well-lit workshop in one of the palace's finest towers. They requested the most expensive silk threads in gold and silver, the rarest dyes, and the most delicate tools. All of these were provided without question, along with a generous payment in advance. The weavers set up two magnificent looms in their workshop and began their work with great ceremony. From morning until night, they could be heard moving about the room, adjusting their equipment, and operating the looms. Courtiers passing by the tower could hear the rhythmic sounds of weaving and would nod approvingly at the dedication of these master craftsmen. But if anyone had been able to see into the workshop, they would have discovered something quite shocking. The two men were not weaving anything at all. The looms held no thread. The shuttles moved through empty air, and their hands manipulated nothing but shadows and pretense. They were, in fact, not weavers at all, but clever swindlers who had perfected the art of deception. After several days, the emperor could contain his curiosity no longer. He decided to send his most trusted advisor to check on the progress of his magnificent new clothes. The old advisor, who had served the emperor faithfully for many years, climbed the tower stairs with great anticipation. He had heard so much about this wonderful fabric that he could hardly wait to see it for himself. He knocked politely on the workshop door and was graciously invited inside. "Ah, distinguished sir," exclaimed the first weaver, gesturing grandly toward his empty loom. "You have come at the perfect time. Look at this exquisite pattern we've just completed. Have you ever seen such intricate work?" The advisor looked at the loom and saw absolutely nothing. The frame was completely empty, without even a single thread stretched across it. His heart began to race with panic. According to what the weavers had said, only intelligent, competent people could see the fabric. If he couldn't see anything, did that mean he was stupid? Did it mean he was unfit for his position? I stammered the advisor, his mind reeling with worry. "And observe the colors in this section," continued the second weaver, pointing to another part of the empty loom. "The way the golden threads catch the light and seem to dance with the silver ones. It's absolutely breathtaking, don't you think?" The advisor stared harder, desperately hoping that somehow the fabric would materialize before his eyes, but he saw nothing but empty space and wooden loom frames. "Oh yes," he said finally, not wanting to admit his apparent stupidity. "Yes, it's absolutely beautiful. The patterns are indeed exquisite, and the colors are remarkable. We're so pleased you appreciate our work," said the first weaver with a knowing smile. "The emperor has such refined taste in choosing his advisors." The advisor spent several more minutes in the workshop, listening to the weavers describe details of their invisible fabric and nodding enthusiastically at everything they said. When he finally left, his head was spinning with confusion and worry. When he returned to the emperor, however, he put on his most confident expression. "Your Majesty," he reported, "the fabric is absolutely magnificent. I have never seen anything so beautiful in all my years of service. The patterns are incredibly intricate, and the colors are simply divine. The emperor was delighted by this report and immediately sent a second trusted courtier to observe the weaver's progress. This courtier, like the advisor before him, saw absolutely nothing on the empty looms but was too afraid to admit it. He returned to the emperor with glowing reports of the fabric's extraordinary beauty. Word of the magnificent fabric began to spread throughout the palace. Everyone was talking about the emperor's amazing new clothes, though no one had actually seen them. The anticipation grew daily, and people began to speculate about when the emperor would first appear in his wonderful new outfit. After 2 weeks of intensive work, the weavers announced that they were ready to fit the emperor for his new clothes. They sent word that His Majesty should come to the workshop for the final measurements and to see the completed fabric. The emperor, accompanied by his most important courtiers and advisors, climbed the tower stairs in great excitement. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The chance to see his incredible new clothes and to know that his intelligence and worthiness would be proven for all to see. "Your Imperial Majesty," exclaimed both weavers as he entered the workshop, "you arrive at the perfect moment. The fabric is completely finished, and we are ready to begin the final tailoring." The emperor looked at the looms and saw nothing at all. Not a single thread, not a hint of color, nothing but empty wooden frames. His heart sank into his stomach, and cold fear crept up his spine. If he couldn't see the fabric, did that mean he was stupid? Did it mean he was unworthy to be emperor? "Behold the magnificence of your new outfit," declared the first weaver, gesturing toward what appeared to be empty air. "Have you ever seen such lustrous colors, such elegant patterns?" "And notice the perfect drape of the fabric," added the second weaver, appearing to lift an invisible garment. "It flows like water, yet maintains its structure beautifully." The emperor stared desperately at the empty space, willing himself to see something, anything. Around him, his courtiers were nodding and murmuring appreciatively, though he noticed that their expressions seemed somewhat strained. It's absolutely magnificent," the emperor said finally, his voice slightly hollow. "I have never seen anything so beautiful." "Shall we help you try it on?" asked the weavers. "We believe it will fit you perfectly." And so began the most elaborate dressing ceremony in the history of the kingdom. The emperor removed his regular clothes while the weavers pretended to dress him in the invisible garments. They appeared to slip a shirt over his head, carefully adjusted invisible sleeves, and smoothed non-existent wrinkles. "The jacket fits you perfectly, Your Majesty," said one weaver, appearing to button up the front of nothing at all. "And the trousers are exactly the right length," added the other, seeming to make adjustments to the emperor's bare legs. All the while, the courtiers watched and exclaimed over the beauty of clothes they couldn't see, each one afraid to be the first to admit that the emperor appeared to be wearing nothing but his underwear. "Magnificent," declared the chief advisor. "Absolutely stunning," agreed the treasurer. "The colors are extraordinary," added the captain of the guard, though his voice shook slightly as he spoke. Finally, the weavers announced that the outfit was complete. They led the emperor to a full-length mirror, where he saw himself standing in his underwear, but pretended to admire the beautiful clothes he believed he should be able to see. "Your Majesty," suggested the first weaver, "perhaps you would like to show off your new outfit to your subjects? We're sure they would be amazed by such incredible finery." The idea of a grand procession through the city appealed enormously to the emperor. He would parade through the streets in his magnificent new clothes, and everyone would see how intelligent and worthy he was. Those who couldn't see the clothes would reveal themselves to be stupid or incompetent, while those who could see them would appreciate his refined taste and superior judgment. "Excellent idea, declared the emperor. "We shall have a grand procession this very afternoon." Word spread quickly throughout the city that the emperor would be displaying his remarkable new clothes in a royal procession. People lined the streets hours in advance, eager to see the incredible fabric. they had heard so much about. Everyone knew the story of the special properties of the cloth, and no one wanted to be revealed as stupid or incompetent. At the appointed hour, the emperor emerged from his palace. He walked proudly at the head of the procession, his head held high and his steps confident. Behind him came his courtiers and advisers, all maintaining expressions of admiration and respect. The crowd that lined the streets had the same reaction as everyone else who had encountered the emperor's new clothes. They saw a man walking in his underwear, but they had been told that only intelligent, worthy people could see the magnificent fabric. Not wanting to appear stupid, they began to cheer and applaud. "Look at the emperor's beautiful new clothes," shouted someone in the crowd. "The colors are absolutely gorgeous," called out another person. "I've never seen such fine tailoring," exclaimed a third. The emperor beamed with pride as he heard the acclaim of his subjects. He walked even more proudly, convinced that his wonderful new clothes were having exactly the effect he had hoped for. The procession continued through the main streets of the city, with the crowd growing larger and more enthusiastic. People pointed and cheered, describing the beauty of clothes they couldn't see, each person afraid to be the one who revealed their apparent stupidity. But then, from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, a clear, innocent voice rang out above all the others. "But the emperor isn't wearing any clothes at all." The voice belonged to a small child who had been lifted onto his father's shoulders to get a better view of the procession. The child, too young to understand the supposed magic of the fabric or to worry about appearing stupid, simply said what he saw. A hush fell over the crowd as the child's words echoed through the street. People looked more closely at the emperor, and suddenly the truth became impossible to ignore. There were no beautiful clothes, no magnificent fabric, no incredible colors or patterns. The emperor was indeed walking through the city in nothing but his underwear. "The child is right," whispered someone in the crowd. "The emperor has no clothes on," said another person, more loudly this time. "We've all been pretending," exclaimed a third voice. Like a wave spreading through water, the truth rippled through the crowd. People began to laugh, not cruelly, but with relief at finally being able to acknowledge what they had all seen, but been afraid to say. The emperor heard the murmur of the crowd changing from admiration to laughter, and he realized with growing horror what had happened. He had been deceived by clever swindlers, and now he was parading through his city in his underwear while his subjects laughed at his foolishness. For a moment, he considered stopping the procession and running back to the palace to hide his embarrassment. But then something remarkable happened. The emperor realized that pretending any longer would only make things worse. He had made a mistake, a rather spectacular one, but he was still the emperor, and he could choose how to respond to this situation. Taking a deep breath, the emperor stopped walking and turned to face his subjects. "My dear people," he said in a clear, strong voice, "it appears that I have been the victim of a very clever trick. These master weavers have taken advantage of my vanity and love of beautiful clothes, and I have been foolish enough to fall for their deception." The crowd fell silent, unsure of how to respond to this unexpected honesty. "I have learned an important lesson today," the emperor continued. "I have learned that it is better to admit when we are wrong than to pretend we are right when we know we are not. I have also learned that sometimes it takes the innocent honesty of a child to help us see the truth that we adults have been too afraid to acknowledge." He looked directly at the little boy who had first spoken up. "Thank you, young man, for your honesty. You have done your emperor a great service today." The crowd began to cheer, not for the emperor's clothes this time, but for his honesty and his grace in handling an embarrassing situation. People realized that their ruler, while perhaps a bit vain about his appearance, was fundamentally a good and honest man who could admit his mistakes and learn from them. The emperor returned to his palace, where he immediately ordered the arrest of the two fake weavers. but they had vanished during the procession, taking with them all the gold, silver thread, and precious materials that had been provided for their work. From that day forward, the emperor still loved beautiful clothes, but he was much more careful about who he trusted and much less concerned with impressing others. He learned to value honesty above flattery and truth above appearance. And the little boy who had spoken the truth became something of a hero in the kingdom, remembered as the child who was brave enough to say what everyone else was thinking but afraid to voice. The story of the emperor's new clothes became a favorite tale told throughout the land, reminding people that it's always better to be honest than to pretend, and that sometimes the most important truths come from the most unexpected sources. The Snow Queen. In a city where winter lasted half the year and snow painted the rooftops white as sugar, there lived two children who loved each other like brother and sister. Kay and Gerda were neighbors whose families shared a tiny garden between their apartment buildings. And though they were not related by blood, their hearts were connected by the strongest bonds of friendship and love. The little garden was their magical kingdom. In summer, roses climbed the walls between their windows, filling the air with sweet perfume and providing a canopy of pink and white blossoms under which they would sit and tell each other stories. Kay's grandmother, who was known for her wisdom and kindness, had given them a beautiful picture book filled with fairy tales, and they would spend hours looking at the illustrations and imagining themselves in far-off lands filled with adventure. But it was in winter that their friendship truly bloomed. When snow covered the city and ice painted fern patterns on the windows, Kay and Gerda would press their noses to the cold glass and watch the snowflakes dance like tiny ballerinas in the wind. Each snowflake is different, Kay would tell Gerda, his breath fogging the window. Grandmother says that no two are exactly alike and that each one is perfectly made. They look like little stars, Gerda would reply, tracing the frost patterns with her finger, or like tiny flowers made of ice. One particularly cold evening, as they sat by Kay's window watching the snow fall thick and fast, his grandmother joined them with cups of hot chocolate and a new story to tell. "Would you like to hear about the Snow Queen?" she asked, settling into her rocking chair with her knitting. The children nodded eagerly. Grandmother's stories were always the most wonderful they had ever heard, filled with magic and adventure, but also with important truths about life and love. "The Snow Queen is the most beautiful woman in the world," Grandmother began, her needles clicking softly as she worked. "She is made entirely of ice and snow, with hair like spun silver and a dress that sparkles like diamonds. She travels the world in a sleigh pulled by white horses, and wherever she goes, winter follows." "Is she good or evil?" asked Gerda, cuddling closer to Kay on their shared cushion. "That depends," said Grandmother thoughtfully. "The Snow Queen is neither good nor evil. She simply is what she is. Winter can be beautiful and peaceful, but it can also be cold and dangerous. The Snow Queen's heart is made of ice, so she cannot feel warmth or love the way we do. That makes her dangerous to those who are warm-hearted, because she cannot understand why anyone would choose love over the perfect cold beauty of eternal winter." Kay listened to this story with fascination, but something about the Snow Queen intrigued him in a way he didn't quite understand. The idea of a world without messy emotions, without the pain that sometimes came with loving people, seemed oddly appealing. That night, as Kay slept, something terrible happened. One of the windows in his bedroom had been left slightly open, and through that tiny gap came two almost invisible fragments of an evil mirror that had been shattered high in the sky. This mirror had been created long ago by a wicked sorcerer who delighted in making people see the worst in everything. The mirror showed only ugliness, cruelty, and faults, making beautiful things appear hideous and kind actions seem selfish. When the mirror had been accidentally broken, its pieces had scattered across the world, and wherever they landed, they brought sorrow and bitterness. One tiny splinter flew directly into Kay's eye, and another pierced his heart. The moment they entered his body, everything changed for the little boy. The warm, loving feelings that had filled his heart seemed to freeze and crystallize, becoming sharp and cold as winter ice. When Kay woke up the next morning, Gerda immediately noticed that something was different about him. His eyes, which had always been warm and kind, now had a cold, distant look. When she suggested they go out to play in the garden, he snapped at her irritably. "Play in the garden? Don't be stupid, Gerda. Look at those roses. They're all brown and dying, and the snow is dirty and ugly. Why would anyone want to play in such an ugly place?" Gerda stared at him in shock. The roses were dormant for winter, as they always were, but she had never heard Kay speak so harshly about anything before, least of all their beloved garden. "Kay, what's wrong?" she asked gently. "You don't sound like yourself." "There's nothing wrong with me," Kay replied coldly. "I'm just finally seeing things the way they really are, instead of pretending everything is pretty and nice when it's not." As the days passed, Kay became colder and more distant. He mocked Gerda's gentle nature, called her stories silly and childish, and spent his time making cruel jokes about their neighbors. The warm-hearted boy who had been her dearest friend seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone who found fault with everything and took pleasure in pointing out ugliness and imperfection. Gerda tried everything she could think of to reach the real Kay, the kind boy she loved. She brought him his favorite foods, suggested their old games, and even offered to let him read their fairy tale book first, something she had never done before, since they had always shared everything equally. But nothing worked. Kay seemed determined to find fault with everything she did and everything around him. He complained that the food tasted terrible, that the games were boring, and that the fairy tales were ridiculous stories for babies. One winter afternoon, as Gerda watched sadly from her window, Kay took his sled out to the town square to slide down the hills with the other children. She wanted to join him, hoping that perhaps their old winter games might remind him of how much they had enjoyed playing together. But when she arrived at the square, she saw Kay doing something that made her heart pound with fear. A magnificent white sleigh had appeared in the square, pulled by white horses and driven by a figure wrapped in furs so beautiful and pristine they seemed to glow. Kay had tied his small sled to the back of this grand sleigh, and it was pulling him faster and faster across the snow. The figure in the sleigh turned to look at Kay, and Gerda caught a glimpse of the most beautiful and terrible face she had ever seen. It was a woman with skin like polished ice, hair like spun silver, and eyes like winter stars. She was breathtakingly lovely, but her beauty was cold and heartless, without warmth or kindness. It was the Snow Queen from Grandmother's story. The Snow Queen smiled at Kay, a smile like icicles forming on a roof edge, and beckoned for him to climb up into her sleigh. Without hesitation, Kay abandoned his own sled and climbed up beside her. "Kay!" Gerda screamed, running toward the sleigh as fast as her legs could carry her. "Kay, come back!" But either Kay couldn't hear her over the wind, or he chose not to respond. The Snow Queen's sleigh rose into the air, carrying Kay away into the gray winter sky. Within moments, they had disappeared completely, leaving nothing behind but the tracks of the sleigh runners in the snow and Kay's abandoned sled. Gerda stood in the empty square, tears freezing on her cheeks as she realized that her dearest friend had been taken away by the most dangerous creature in all the fairy tales. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a fierce determination began to grow in her heart. She would find Kay, no matter how far she had to travel, no matter what dangers she had to face. She would find him and bring him home. Love, she knew, was stronger than any magic, even the cold magic of the Snow Queen. The next morning, despite the protests of both families, Gerda set out on her journey. She had no clear idea of where to go, but she trusted that if she followed her heart and never gave up hope, somehow she would find the path that led to Kay. Her first stop was at the river that ran along the edge of the city. Perhaps the water could tell her which way the Snow Queen had taken Kay. She climbed into a small boat that was moored at the dock and spoke to the flowing water as if it were an old friend. "Dear river," she said, "please tell me, have you seen Kay? The Snow Queen took him away and I must find him." The river seemed to understand her desperate need. Instead of carrying her back to shore, it began to flow in the opposite direction, carrying her boat downstream toward unknown lands. For hours, Gerda sailed along the peaceful river, hoping it was taking her toward Kay. Eventually, the boat drifted to shore beside a beautiful garden filled with flowers of every kind imaginable. Even though it was winter everywhere else, here the sun shone warmly and roses bloomed as if it were the middle of summer. An old woman came out of a cottage to meet her. She had kind eyes and a gentle manner, and she seemed genuinely concerned to see a young girl traveling alone. "My dear child," she said, "what are you doing out here all by yourself? Come inside and warm up and tell me what has brought you so far from home." The old woman's cottage was cozy and welcoming, filled with the scent of baking bread and blooming flowers. She gave Gerda warm clothes to replace her wet ones, delicious food, and a comfortable bed. For the first time since Kay had been taken, Gerda felt safe and cared for. But as the days passed in this peaceful paradise, Gerda began to feel strangely content and drowsy. The urgency of finding Kay seemed to fade away, replaced by a dreamy contentment with the beautiful garden and the kind old woman's care. The old woman, though well-meaning, was actually a gentle witch who had grown lonely over the years. She had used magic to make Gerda forget about Kay, hoping to keep the sweet child as a companion. The spell wasn't evil. It was born of loneliness rather than malice, but it was still keeping Gerda from her true purpose. One afternoon, as Gerda wandered through the magical garden, she saw something that broke through the spell, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Among all the exotic flowers was a single rose bush, and it reminded her instantly of the roses that had grown in her shared garden with Kay. The moment she saw those familiar flowers, all her memories came flooding back. Kay's laughter, their shared stories, the terrible day when the Snow Queen had taken him away. Everything returned with crystal clarity. "I have to go," she told the kind old woman that evening. "I have to find my friend Kay. The Snow Queen took him, and he needs my help." The old woman saw the determination in Gerda's eyes and realized that no spell could compete with such powerful love and loyalty. With a sigh, she helped Gerda prepare for the continuation of her journey. "Take this," she said, giving Gerda a warm cloak that would protect her from the worst cold. "And remember, dear child, that love is the strongest magic of all." Gerda's journey continued through many strange and wonderful lands. She met a prince and princess who tried to help her search for Kay, though they had not seen him. She encountered a family of robbers, and though they were rough and dangerous, even they were moved by her story of loyal friendship. The robber girl, who was about Gerda's age but much wilder and fiercer, decided to help her. She gave Gerda her own reindeer to ride and directions to the Snow Queen's palace, which lay far to the north in the land of eternal winter. "My reindeer knows the way to Lapland," the robber girl told her. "That's where the Snow Queen's palace is. But be careful. The journey is dangerous, and the Snow Queen's magic is very powerful." Gerda rode the reindeer through forests and across frozen lakes, through blizzards and over mountains covered in ice. The farther north they traveled, the colder it became, until even her magical cloak could barely keep out the bitter wind. Finally, they reached the very edge of the world, where the Snow Queen's palace stood like a castle made of ice and starlight. It was beautiful beyond description, with towers that spiraled up toward the aurora borealis and walls that sparkled like captured rainbows. But it was also terribly cold and empty, without any sign of life or warmth. The palace doors stood open, as if no one had ever needed to keep anyone out. Inside, vast halls stretched away into blue-white distances, all carved from ice and decorated with frozen sculptures that looked like they had once been living things. Gerda searched room after room, calling Kay's name, her voice echoing strangely in the icy chambers. Finally, in the very heart of the palace, she found what she was looking for. Kay sat alone in the center of a vast frozen lake, his lips blue with cold and his eyes empty and distant. In front of him were scattered pieces of ice like letters or puzzle pieces, which he was trying to arrange with fingers so cold they could barely move. Kay, Gerda cried, running to him across the slippery ice. Kay, I've found you at last. But when Kay looked up at her, there was no recognition in his eyes, no joy at seeing his dearest friend. The splinters of the evil mirror had done their work too well. His heart had become so cold that he could no longer remember what it felt like to love or be loved. Go away, he said in a voice like winter wind. Can't you see I'm busy? The Snow Queen has given me a puzzle to solve. If I can arrange these ice pieces to spell the word eternity, she'll give me the whole world and a pair of new skates, but I can't figure out how the pieces fit together. Gerda knelt beside him on the ice, tears streaming down her face as she saw how the cold had changed her beloved friend. But she didn't give up. Instead, she wrapped her arms around Kay and began to sing the same lullabies his grandmother had sung to them, the same songs they had made up together during their happy times in the garden. As she sang, her tears fell on Kay's chest, right where his heart lay frozen beneath his shirt. The tears were so warm with love and sorrow that they melted through his clothes and skin, washing away the splinter of evil mirror that had turned his heart to ice. The moment the splinter was gone, Kay's eyes cleared. He looked at Gerda as if seeing her for the first time in months, and suddenly he remembered everything: their friendship, their shared garden, the warmth of love that had filled his life before the mirror's curse had stolen it away. Gerda, he cried, throwing his arms around her. My dear, dear Gerda, how did you find me? Where have I been? As they embraced, their tears of joy fell on the scattered ice pieces, and something miraculous happened. The letters began to move by themselves, arranging themselves into the word the Snow Queen had challenged Kay to spell, eternity. At that moment, the Snow Queen herself appeared in the great hall, tall and beautiful and terrible in her icy majesty. But when she saw that Kay had been freed from her spell, that his heart was warm with love again, she knew her power over him was broken. You have solved my puzzle, she said to Kay, her voice like wind through icicles. You are free to go. But Gerda stepped forward bravely to face the Snow Queen. It wasn't Kay who solved your puzzle, she said firmly. It was love. Love arranged those letters. Love melted the ice around Kay's heart, and love brought me here to find him. The Snow Queen looked at this small, brave girl who had traveled so far and faced so many dangers for the sake of friendship, and for just a moment, something almost like respect flickered in her cold eyes. Perhaps, she said finally, there are some puzzles that ice and winter cannot solve. With that, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the vast hall until she disappeared entirely, leaving only a swirl of snowflakes in her wake. Kay and Gerda left the ice palace hand in hand and found that Gerda's reindeer was waiting faithfully outside to carry them home. The journey back was swift and joyful, filled with laughter and conversation as Kay told Gerda everything he remembered about his time in the Snow Queen's palace, and Gerda told him about all the friends who had helped her during her search. When they finally reached their own city and saw their shared garden again, they realized that something wonderful had happened during their adventure. Though they were still children in their hearts, their bodies had grown during the long journey and the many months apart. They were no longer little children, but young people who had learned important lessons about love, loyalty, and the strength that comes from never giving up on those we care about. But their friendship remained as strong as ever, and the roses in their garden bloomed more beautifully than ever before. They would sit beneath the blossoms on summer evenings, reading their fairy tale book and marveling that they had lived through an adventure as magical as any in those pages. And Kay's grandmother, now very old, but still wise and loving, would join them sometimes to listen to the story of their journey to the Snow Queen's palace. She would nod approvingly when they reached the part about love being stronger than any magic, because she had known all along that the love between true friends is the most powerful force in the world, stronger than ice, stronger than winter, and stronger than any spell that tries to freeze the human heart. The Nightingale. In ancient China, where the forbidden city rose like a mountain of gold and jade against the sky, there ruled an emperor whose palace was so magnificent that visitors from around the world would travel for months just to marvel at its beauty. The walls were made of the finest porcelain, decorated with precious stones that caught the light like captured stars. The garden stretched for miles, filled with the most exotic flowers and trees from every corner of the empire. Everything in the emperor's domain was designed to display wealth and power. The servants wore silk robes embroidered with silver threads. The guards carried spears topped with ivory and gold, and every room in the vast palace was filled with treasures beyond imagination. Visitors would walk through the halls with their mouths open in wonder, unable to believe that such magnificence could exist in the mortal world. But the most beautiful part of the palace was the garden that extended beyond the formal courtyards into a natural forest. Here, ancient trees grew tall and straight, their branches forming a canopy so thick that even at midday, the light that filtered through was green and magical. Crystal streams wound between moss-covered rocks, and the air was filled with the gentle music of wind chimes and flowing water. It was in the furthest corner of this enchanted forest, where few people ever ventured, that the most extraordinary treasure of all made its home. But this treasure was not made of gold or precious stones. It was a small, plain gray bird with bright, intelligent eyes and the most beautiful voice that had ever existed. The nightingale, as the bird was known, sang every evening as the sun set behind the mountains. Her songs were so lovely that they could make the strongest warrior weep with homesickness or fill the loneliest heart with hope and joy. The flowers seemed to bloom more brightly when she sang, and even the fish in the streams would rise to the surface to listen. The fishermen who worked in the nearby harbor had discovered the nightingale years ago, and they would often pause in their work just to hear her evening concert. "Listen," they would whisper to each other. "The nightingale is singing. There is no sound more beautiful in all the world." Travelers who happened to pass through the area would stop in amazement when they heard the pure, sweet voice echoing through the forest. They would write about it in their journals and tell their friends about the magical bird that sang like an angel in the Chinese emperor's garden. But somehow, despite all the visitors and all the stories, word of the nightingale had never reached the emperor himself. He was so surrounded by artificial beauty, mechanical toys, golden ornaments, and elaborate court entertainments that he had never ventured into the quiet, natural part of his own garden where the nightingale lived. One day, the emperor received a letter from the emperor of Japan congratulating him on possessing the most wonderful treasure in all of China, the remarkable nightingale whose voice was famous throughout the world. The Chinese emperor read the letter 3 times, growing more confused and embarrassed with each reading. "The nightingale?" he muttered to himself. "What nightingale? I have never heard of any nightingale in my palace. How can the emperor of Japan know about something in my own domain that I have never heard of?" He immediately summoned his lord-in-waiting, the most important court official, whose job it was to know everything that happened in the palace and surrounding grounds. "Tell me about this nightingale," demanded the emperor, waving the letter angrily. "The emperor of Japan writes to congratulate me on this wonderful bird, but I have never heard of it. How is it possible that there is something remarkable in my own palace that I know nothing about?" The lord in waiting turned pale with fear. He had never heard of any nightingale either, but he dared not admit his ignorance to the emperor. Your Imperial Majesty, he stammered, I will investigate this matter immediately and report back to you. The lord in waiting rushed through the palace, questioning everyone he could find. The servants in the kitchen had never heard of a nightingale. The guards at the gates knew nothing about any special bird. The gardeners who maintained the formal flower beds looked at him blankly when he asked about a singing bird. Finally, in desperation, he ventured into the kitchens where the lowest servants worked. There he found a young kitchen maid who was scrubbing pots, her hands red from the hot water and her simple dress stained with cooking spills. Please, said the lord in waiting, have you ever heard of a nightingale in the palace grounds? The kitchen maid looked up in surprise. It was unusual for such an important court official to speak to someone as lowly as herself. Oh, yes, my lord, she said simply. The nightingale lives in the forest beyond the gardens. She sings every evening, and her voice is the most beautiful sound in the world. I hear her every night when I take scraps to my mother, who lives in a cottage near the forest edge. The lord in waiting could hardly believe that this humble kitchen maid knew about the treasure that had been hidden from the emperor himself. Could you show me where this nightingale lives? He asked. Of course, my lord, said the girl whose name was May. I would be honored to help. That evening, as the sun began to set, May led the lord in waiting and a small group of curious courtiers into the part of the palace grounds that few of them had ever visited. As they walked deeper into the natural forest, away from the manicured gardens and golden pavilions, the court officials began to look around nervously. Are we still on the palace grounds? Whispered one. This doesn't look like the emperor's garden at all. It's so wild and unkempt, murmured another. Surely nothing of value could live in such a simple place. But May led them confidently along the winding paths, past ancient trees and babbling streams, until they reached a clearing where the last rays of sunlight filtered down through the leaves like golden arrows. Listen, she said softly, holding up her hand for silence. As if summoned by her words, a pure, sweet voice began to sing from somewhere high in the branches above them. The song was unlike anything the court officials had ever heard. Not the elaborate musical performances they were used to in the palace, but something simpler and infinitely more beautiful. The voice rose and fell like gentle waves, expressing emotions too deep for words. The lord in waiting felt tears spring to his eyes, though he couldn't have said why. The other courtiers stood transfixed, their usual chatter and gossip forgotten in the presence of such pure beauty. There, said May simply, there is the nightingale. Looking up, they could just make out a small gray bird perched on a branch, her throat vibrating with the effort of her song. She was so plain to look at, so small and unremarkable, that if they hadn't heard her singing, they might have walked right past her without a second glance. When the song ended, the forest seemed to hold its breath in the silence that followed. The lord in waiting was the first to speak, his voice hushed with awe. We must bring her to the emperor immediately, he said. His imperial majesty must hear this remarkable creature. But May looked troubled. My lord, she said hesitantly, the nightingale has always lived free in the forest. I don't know if she would be happy singing in the palace. Nonsense, declared the lord in waiting, his practical court mind already working out the details. The emperor wishes to hear the nightingale, and what the emperor wishes, he must have. We'll create a beautiful cage for her, give her the finest foods, and she'll want for nothing. That night they returned with a magnificent golden cage encrusted with jewels and lined with the softest silk. The nightingale, who was kind-hearted and gentle, did not resist when they asked her to come with them. She had heard of the emperor's great loneliness, surrounded by beauty that was impressive but cold, and she felt sorry for him. If my singing can bring joy to the emperor, she said in her sweet voice, then I will gladly come to the palace. The next evening, the emperor held a great court ceremony to hear the nightingale sing. The throne room was filled with the most important people in the empire, all dressed in their finest robes and jewels. The nightingale's cage was placed on a golden pedestal in the center of the room, where everyone could see the small gray bird that had become so famous. When the emperor nodded his head, the nightingale began to sing. Her voice filled the vast hall with the same pure, sweet music that had enchanted visitors in the forest. But now, surrounded by marble walls and golden decorations, her song seemed even more miraculous by contrast. The emperor was moved to tears by the beauty of the music. He had heard the finest musicians in the empire, the most elaborate operas and complex symphonies, but nothing had ever touched his heart the way this simple bird song did. For the first time in years, he felt genuine emotion, not the satisfaction of owning something valuable, but the pure joy that comes from experiencing true beauty. Magnificent, he declared when the song ended. Little nightingale, you have given me more pleasure than all the treasures in my palace. Name any reward you desire, and it shall be yours. The nightingale looked at the emperor with her bright, kind eyes. Your Majesty's tears are reward enough for me, she said gently. When a true emperor weeps at my song, it means more to me than any gold or jewels. The emperor was so charmed by this response that he ordered the nightingale to be given the place of honor at court. She was to live in a beautiful room near the throne room, go out twice a day and once at night, and always have 12 servants to attend her, each holding a silk ribbon tied to her leg. But as the days passed, the nightingale began to grow sad. The palace, for all its luxury, was nothing like her beloved forest. She missed the rustling of leaves, the sound of flowing streams, and most of all, the freedom to sing when her heart moved her to, rather than on command for the entertainment of the court. Her songs, though still beautiful, began to lose some of their spontaneous joy. The emperor noticed the change, but didn't understand what was causing it. He gave her an even more magnificent cage, more servants, and richer foods, thinking that luxury would restore her happiness. Meanwhile, a package arrived at the palace from the Emperor of Japan, a gift to show his appreciation for the wonderful descriptions he had heard of the Chinese nightingale's singing. Inside the ornate box was a mechanical bird covered in gold and precious stones with diamonds for eyes and rubies along its wings. When wound up, the mechanical bird could sing one beautiful song over and over again, never varying in tempo or melody. Its voice was lovely in its own way, perfect, precise, and unchanging. The courtiers were immediately fascinated by this new treasure. "How wonderful!" they exclaimed. "It sings the same song exactly the same way every time. You always know what you're going to hear." "And look how beautiful it is," added others. "Those gems, that gold lamp, it's a work of art as well as a musician." The emperor was intrigued by the mechanical bird, and he decided to have both birds sing together, the real nightingale and the artificial one. But the duet was a disaster. The real nightingale sang with her heart, varying her song according to her feelings and the mood of the moment, while the mechanical bird repeated its programmed melody without any variation or emotion. "They don't match at all," complained the court musicians. "The real bird is too unpredictable. She doesn't follow any proper musical rules." Before long, the courtiers began to prefer the mechanical bird. It was more reliable, more decorative, and more impressive to visitors who wanted to see the emperor's treasures. They could wind it up whenever they wanted entertainment, and it would perform perfectly every time without any temperamental behavior. The real nightingale began to feel more and more out of place. One evening, when everyone was gathered around the mechanical bird, marveling at its jeweled exterior and precise performance, she quietly slipped out of her cage and flew through an open window back to her beloved forest. Her disappearance wasn't noticed until the next day, when the emperor called for her to sing at breakfast. The servants searched everywhere, but she was gone. "How ungrateful," declared the lord-in-waiting. "After all the kindness His Imperial Majesty showed her, she simply flies away without so much as a thank you." "We don't need her anyway," said the court musicians. "The mechanical bird is much better. more reliable, and much more beautiful to look at. The emperor, though he felt a pang of sadness at losing the little bird who had moved him so deeply, convinced himself that the courtiers were right. The mechanical bird was placed on a silk cushion beside his throne, and it sang for him every day at exactly the same time, in exactly the same way. A year passed, and the mechanical bird remained the pride of the court. Visitors were always impressed by its beauty and perfect performance. The emperor would wind it up to show off to foreign ambassadors, and it never failed to produce its flawless song. But one evening, as the emperor was listening to his mechanical bird's nightly performance, something went wrong. In the middle of its song, there was a horrible grinding sound, and the bird suddenly stopped singing. Its jeweled wings drooped, and no amount of winding could make it perform again. The finest clockmaker in the empire was summoned to examine the mechanical bird. After hours of careful work, he shook his head sadly. "Your Imperial Majesty," he said, "the mechanism is worn out from overuse. I can repair it, but it will only be able to sing once or twice a year from now on, and even then, we must be very careful not to damage it further." The emperor was devastated. He had grown dependent on his mechanical bird's daily performances, and the thought of mostly silence was unbearable. He fell into a deep depression, spending his days staring out the window and refusing to see visitors or attend to the business of the empire. Months passed, and the emperor grew seriously ill from sorrow and loneliness. The court physicians tried everything they could think of, but nothing seemed to help. The emperor lay in his great bed, pale and weak, with the broken, mechanical bird silent on its cushion nearby. One night, when the emperor was feeling particularly low and the palace was quiet around him, he heard something that made his heart skip with hope and recognition. Through his open window came the sound of the most beautiful singing, pure, sweet, and alive with genuine emotion. It was the nightingale, returned from her forest home. She had heard of the emperor's illness and had come to sing for him one more time, not from obligation or for reward, but out of compassion for a lonely, sad man who had once wept at the beauty of her song. As she sang, the emperor felt strength and hope returning to his body. The music seemed to wash away his sorrow and fill his heart with peace. When the song ended, he looked toward the window where the small gray bird perched on the sill. "Dear Nightingale," he whispered, "I understand now why you left. I tried to cage your song, to own your beauty, when I should have simply been grateful for the gift of hearing it. Can you ever forgive a foolish old emperor?" The nightingale's eyes sparkled with kindness. "Your Imperial Majesty," she said gently, "there is nothing to forgive. You have learned what many people never discover, that true beauty cannot be owned or controlled. It can only be appreciated and cherished." "Will you stay with me?" asked the emperor hopefully. "I promise, no cage, no servants, no commands to perform. Just, will you visit sometimes when you feel moved to sing?" "I will come every evening," promised the nightingale, "and sing for you as long as you wish to hear me, but I must remain free to fly back to my forest home, where my heart lives among the trees and streams." From that night forward, the nightingale kept her promise. Every evening she would perch on the emperor's windowsill and fill the room with her beautiful songs. The emperor's health improved dramatically, and his natural kindness and wisdom returned. He learned to appreciate the mechanical bird for what it was, a beautiful work of art, without expecting it to replace the genuine beauty of the living nightingale. And he learned the most important lesson of all, that the most precious things in life cannot be bought, owned, or controlled. They can only be loved and appreciated in freedom. The nightingale continued to visit the emperor for many years, and their friendship became deeper and more meaningful than any relationship built on ownership or obligation. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, people walking through the forest could hear two voices, one human, one bird, talking together like old friends, sharing stories and laughter under the stars.